For ages, humanity has endured a brutal war against the Demon Lord, a conflict that has claimed countless lives and left the world in ruins. But hope finally arrived in the form of a hero chosen by the goddess herself, tasked with ending the Demon King's reign of terror once and for all. As El clashes with the Demon Lord, his allies realize they've reached their breaking point and desperately urge him to retreat before they're all wiped out. With tears in her eyes, a short-haired girl begs him to survive at all costs, even as the team is forced to abandon the battlefield. Glancing back, El shouts for them to go, promising to handle the rest alone, prompting the girl to activate a teleportation spell to whisk the team to safety. Now truly alone, El faces the Demon King and prays for the goddess's divine protection to end this nightmare once and for all. When El finally regains consciousness, he's met with suffocating darkness. Casting a light spell, he's horrified to find himself buried under a mountain of skeletons. Realizing he's trapped deep in a subterranean tomb, El knows he needs to escape immediately before the lack of oxygen claims his life. With a flick of his wrist, he triggers a teleportation spell that briefly illuminates the dungeon before depositing him safely back on the surface. Surveying the landscape, he's stunned to see the absolute devastation his final clash with the Demon Lord left behind. El removes his heavy helmet, setting it on the ground before running a hand through his messy hair to clear his head. Staring into the distance, he reflects on his victory, realizing humanity is finally safe and offering a silent prayer of thanks to the goddess. Suddenly, his blade erupts in a blinding radiance, the light swirling into a violent vortex that catches the hero off guard. The energy expands, enveloping El before a divine figure manifests from the light. The goddess herself has descended from the heavens. She gazes down with a gentle smile, addressing him by his full name, Noel, and expressing her immense relief that he's still alive. She explains that her influence couldn't reach the Demon Lord's domain, leaving her in the dark about his fate while he lay buried under the rubble. As she descends, she drops a bombshell. Noel has been unconscious for 6 months, leaving the hero completely shell-shocked. Panic sets in as he realizes how much could have changed in half a year, and he desperately exclaims that it can't be true. His thoughts immediately race to his comrades, and he frantically asks the goddess if his friends managed to survive the aftermath. The goddess looks away, quietly confirming they are safe, though a shadow of regret flickers across her face. Relieved to hear his companions were safe, Noel finally allowed himself to smile, thanking the goddess from the bottom of his heart. However, the goddess's expression darkened as she warned him that while his friends were fine, the state of his world was a different story. She revealed that the kingdom of Lavanya had officially declared Prince Cain the hero who slew the Demon Lord, and he was greedily soaking up the undeserved praise. Stunned, Noel wondered how the prince could possibly claim victory when his entire squad knew the truth of what had happened. Steeling herself, the goddess delivered the crushing blow. By royal decree, Noel's own friends were now pretending he never even existed. She explained that Ayana had completely discarded Noel's sacrifice, accepting a prestigious position as a court magician for the king. The betrayal didn't end there. The knight Goodal had also abandoned Noel's memory in exchange for a lavish mansion and a massive harem. Even Saint Stella had turned her back on him, becoming engaged to the fraud, Cain Levenius, who now posed as the savior of humanity. These rewards were the price of their silence, a realization that left Noel reeling as he processed the weight of their treachery. He stared at the goddess in a daze, his mind fixated on the impossible news of Stella's engagement to his rival. Noel clutched his head in agony, unable to reconcile this betrayal with the childhood friend he had known and played with for years. While an engagement was hard enough to swallow, the fact that it was to a man like Prince Cain felt like the ultimate insult. The goddess then explained the cold logic behind the king's decree to keep the identity of the true hero a total secret. She argued that if the world learned their true savior had perished, the resulting despair would plunge all of humanity into absolute chaos. To a population exhausted by years of war, the hero needed to be a living symbol of hope, even if that symbol was a total lie. Noel sat in silence, his brow furrowed as he realized just how easily his entire life and legacy had been replaced by a puppet. Though the goddess understood the emperor's desire for stability, Noel's grip tightened on his sword as his blood began to boil. He argued that since he was still alive, the truth could be revealed, but the goddess immediately crushed that final shred of hope. With his last hope shattered, Noel slumped forward, paralyzed by the sheer weight of his mental anguish and loss. She explained that while the secrecy was meant to prevent the demon lord's return, the king also had his own selfish, ulterior motives. Lowering her gaze, the goddess expressed her unease, sensing that something was fundamentally wrong with the situation. The king's suspicions had been festering for a long time, and with the goddess still wary of his motives, she was left to handle the fallout alone. From his towering throne, the king beamed at his subjects, boasting that the kingdom's glory was absolute now that the heroes had emerged from his lands. Glancing down at the kneeling knight, Noel, the king turned to his companion and commanded him to uphold his duties as their grueling journey to protect the realm officially began. Recalling those days, Noel felt a surge of bitterness. Without him, the demon lord would never have fallen. Yet now, everything he fought for was being handed to an undeserving man. The goddess leaned over, pulling him back from his dark thoughts, and gently cupped his face as she asked what his next move would be. With a heavy sigh, he admitted he was lost, but then offered a faint smile, declaring that he wouldn't stop until he secured the peaceful life he craved. Returning home to contemplate his future, Noel packed his few belongings into a rucksack and set off, leaving his old life behind. The goddess offered her final thanks for his victory over the demon lord before he emerged from the forest, passing the city guards to explore the bustling streets. Carrying the goddess's blessing for a happy life, Noel found a local cafe to refuel, where the curious owner asked if he had traveled from afar. As he sat down, a poster caught his eye, an announcement celebrating Saint Stella's pregnancy, leaving Noel stunned as he processed the shocking news. Beaming, the shopkeeper declared the pregnancy a true miracle, one that the entire city was currently celebrating with fervor. The revelation that Saint Stella was pregnant and engaged to the prince hit Noel like a physical blow. He finished his meal in silence and quickly departed the city. Trekking through the woods, he looked to the sky with a heavy heart, realizing he couldn't even congratulate his former flame now that the world believed he was dead. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the forest, sending a pillar of fire soaring above the canopy and leaving Noel frozen in shock. Realizing the blast came from a nearby village, he didn't hesitate, sprinting through the trees and leaping across the terrain to investigate the chaos. Arriving at the scene, Noel skidded to a halt, his blood running cold at the sight of a massive, multi-headed hydra snarling in the distance. Cowering before the beast was a lone woman. She reached out a trembling hand in a desperate, futile attempt to ward off the monster, her body battered and broken. The hydra lunged, all 5 maws agape, as the woman braced for the end. But the killing blow never came, and she opened her eyes to find she was still breathing. She looked up to find herself cradled in the arms of a mysterious youth, who was effortlessly wielding magic to hold the beast at bay as he calmly checked on her. The hydra was clearly enraged that someone dared to stand in its way and deny it a meal, letting out a thunderous roar before lunging at Noel. Without even flinching, Noel charged head-on, his blade becoming a blur as he sliced through the beast with godlike speed. To fight at full strength, he had to set the mysterious girl down, leaving her to watch in absolute awe as her savior dismantled the monster. Once the hydra collapsed lifelessly, Noel approached the girl, who stood up and praised his overwhelming power. Noel ignored the praise, focusing instead on her condition and asking if she had been injured during the brutal encounter. Clutching her chest, she offered a grateful smile, assuring him she was fine thanks to his intervention. But Noel suddenly noticed a chilling detail. He spotted a heavy collar around her neck, a clear sign of servitude, and solemnly asked if she was being held against her will. Her expression darkened as she confessed she was actually a slave warrior, bound to a master who controlled her every move. Looking away in shame, she explained the collar was a failsafe to ensure she completed her missions without ever trying to escape. Without hesitation, Noel casually suggested just taking the thing off, leaving the girl completely stunned by his audacity. She tried to argue that it was impossible, but before she could finish, Noel raised his hand and unleashed a burst of destruction magic, shattering the collar instantly. Falling to her knees in disbelief, she stammered that the collar was supposed to be unbreakable by anyone other than its creator. However, Noel noticed a slave seal hidden beneath the collar, noting that she still wasn't truly free, and offered to erase that as well. Desperate for freedom, she removed her armor to reveal the mark, which Noel examined, noting its complex and powerful magical structure. She warned him that even the greatest mages claimed this specific seal was permanent, but Noel simply remained deep in thought. He reached out once more, channeling his destruction magic directly into the mark until the curse began to peel away from her skin. As the light faded, the girl stared at her unmarked skin in shock. The impossible seal had vanished into thin air. Realizing she was finally a free woman and no longer someone's property, she could no longer hold back her tears of joy. Wiping her eyes, she looked up at Noel with a radiant smile, swearing that she now owed him her very life for what he'd done. Noel leaned in, realizing they hadn't even properly introduced themselves yet, and asked the girl for her name. Sarah introduces herself with a warm smile. Noel returns the gesture, introducing himself as Noel Vega, and expressing his genuine pleasure in meeting her. Touched by Noel's kindness, Sarah remains seated on the ground, shyly admitting that she's equally happy to have met him. As they prepare to set off, Noel realizes they're conveniently heading the same way. Sarah thanks him for the spare clothes, though he apologizes for the awkward fit. He promises to find her proper attire once they reach the city, but Sarah's expression darkens. She reveals that the city is now a ghost town, a revelation that leaves Noel stunned. Upon arrival, Noel's fears are realized. The once vibrant city lies in ruin, a desolate wasteland where life has long since vanished. Sarah explains that after a devastating demon attack, the kingdom sealed off the entire region. Eventually, they arrive at the remains of what was once Noel's home. Standing before the wreckage of his former life, Noel tells Sarah she's his first guest in ages and decides it's time for some spring cleaning, much to her confusion. Without a word of explanation, Noel raises his hands, channeling powerful transformation and purification spells. Magical energy surges as the debris lifts and reassembles itself, restoring the house to its former glory. Sarah watches in awe, mesmerized by the incredible display. With his home restored, Noel invites her inside to talk. Over a quiet table, he finally asks about her true mission in this village, causing Sarah to look away and mumble. Sensing her hesitation, Noel gently asks if her mission is too painful to discuss, but Sarah keeps her head down and insists that isn't the reason. Steeling her resolve, she decides to be honest. With a heavy heart, she reveals that she was sent to this village on the direct orders of the king. The mention of the king catches Noel off guard, but the real shock comes next. Her mission is to erase every trace of Noel Vega's existence, including Noel himself. His expression darkening, Noel asks why the king would want him erased, but Sarah admits she was never told the reason behind the cruel order. Noel assumes she's a royal combat thrall bound to the king's service, but Sarah quickly clarifies that she doesn't actually work for the crown. Fighting back tears, she explains that her master is a renowned hero from the demon wars, though despite his public reputation, he is a deeply unpleasant man. Noel's heart sinks as he realizes this hero might be one of his former comrades. He quietly, but firmly, demands to know the man's name. When Sarah utters the name Goodal, Noel shudders. It's the name of an old friend, one who clearly wants Noel forgotten forever. Seeing his reaction, Sarah asks if they're acquainted. Noel can only mutter a grim confirmation. He knows him all too well. Sarah's sadness turns to anger as she confesses that Goodal and the supposed hero, Prince Cain, have treated her with nothing but contempt. They told Sarah that even if they had to raze the entire ghost town to erase Noel's tracks, it was worth it. They claimed a deserted village held no value, revealing just how ruthless they truly were. Suddenly, Noel looked Sarah in the eye and dropped a bombshell. He was the true hero who defeated the Lord of Darkness, not the prince. Stunned by the revelation, Sarah could only stare at him in a daze. He explained that while he dealt the final blow to the demon lord, the king staged the victory to make Prince Cain look like the savior. Since no one refuted the lie, the prince stole all the glory and the people's love. Sarah was reeling from the news that the entire kingdom had been deceived for so long. Seeing her shock, Noel's companion feared the girl simply didn't believe his incredible story. However, Sarah closed her eyes as the pieces finally clicked into place. She realized the king's order to eliminate Noel was a desperate attempt to bury the truth and protect the prince's false legacy. Having witnessed Noel slay a hydra single-handedly to save her, Sarah knew his strength was the real deal. In her mind, he was the only one who truly embodied the spirit of a hero. She opened her mouth to speak, but her stomach let out a loud, hungry growl before she could get a word out. Blushing a deep crimson, she looked down in total embarrassment. Amused by her reaction, Noel let out a warm laugh and stood up to prepare a meal. Not wanting to be a burden, Sarah quickly jumped up and offered to help him with the cooking. They headed out to the well to fetch some water for their meal, but to their surprise, they found the well was completely bone dry. Noel found this highly suspicious, as the earth goddess's protection should have kept the land fertile. Sarah leaned over the edge to listen, but she couldn't hear even a faint trickle of water below. Growing increasingly wary, Noel scratched his chin as he pondered what could have caused the drought. He eventually suggested they head over to investigate the local shrine to find the source of the problem. When they arrived at the shrine, they were met with a shocking sight: demonic seals. These powerful bindings were capable of trapping even a god, and supposedly only a demon had the power to remove them. Looking at the bindings carefully, Noel assumed they were parting gifts left behind by the demons after their previous attack. Sarah nodded solemnly, her face tight with concern. Without hesitation, Noel clenched his fist and shattered the seals with a single powerful strike. As Sarah watched in awe, a massive torrent of water erupted from the well, soaking everything in sight. The water surged upward, forming a towering pillar that reached above the tree line, and a mysterious girl suddenly leaped out, cheering for her newfound freedom. The petite girl landed gracefully on the edge of the shrine, immediately identifying Noel as the hero and thanking him for his help. Noel was stunned that this total stranger knew his true identity. When he asked how she recognized him, the girl explained that only a true hero could break such powerful demonic seals, and she could feel the divine protection of the goddess radiating from him. Hearing someone finally acknowledge his deeds brought a smile to Noel's face. He had almost given up hope that anyone would ever see him as the hero he truly was. Jumping down to meet them, the girl introduced herself as the Earth Goddess. She explained that despite the seal's restrictions, she had been watching and waiting for the hero to arrive. Sarah stared in disbelief, questioning if this tiny girl could really be a powerful deity, especially since she barely reached Noel's waist. The Earth Goddess was taken aback when she realized she hadn't been recognized due to her small stature. She indignantly snapped that she wasn't nearly as tiny as people claimed, but suddenly she sensed something and craned her neck. Her worst fears were confirmed as she shuddered in shock, her brow furrowing in terror. She immediately leaped back, pointing a trembling finger at Sarah. The goddess shrieked that Sarah was actually a demon. Noel quickly restrained the panicked girl to keep her from kicking, offering a gentle smile to ease her fears. He reassured her that everything was fine, explaining that Sarah was actually a good demon. The goddess looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Once the goddess finally settled down and stopped trembling, Noel set her back on the ground. Sarah approached them, looking thoughtfully at Noel before finally asking if he had known she was a demon from the very beginning. Sarah was stunned that Noel had saved her from the Hydra and freed her from the stigma despite knowing her true nature. With a warm smile, Noel explained that she was in danger, and to him, it didn't matter if she was human or demon. He would always choose to save her. The Earth Goddess bounced back, deciding that if Sarah was a good demon, then everything was fine. She formally introduced herself as Aqua, claiming to be the goddess of the land and their friendly neighborhood deity. After Aqua's eccentric introduction, Noel and Sarah followed suit and introduced themselves. However, the serious moment was quickly broken when Aqua's stomach let out a loud, hungry rumble. Not feeling a shred of embarrassment, the goddess bluntly announced that she was starving. Noel couldn't help but chuckle at her honesty, musing that even a divine being like her had to deal with the pangs of hunger. Noel suggested they whip something up together. Looking down at the pint-sized Aqua, he asked if she could summon water. She eagerly agreed, using her divine powers to fill a bucket to the brim. With the water secured, they were finally able to prepare a proper meal after all their hard work. Before long, plates of steaming fresh food were set on the table, with Noel hoping the girls would enjoy his cooking. As they sat down, Sarah apologized to Noel, feeling guilty that she hadn't been more helpful with the preparation. She mentioned her only skill was hunting, but Noel just smiled and told her not to worry about it. Aqua poked at the greens on her plate with a fork, skeptically asking if they were just eating weeds. Noel clarified that it wasn't a weed, but rather a nutritious wild grass that was perfectly edible. After taking her first bite of Noel's cooking, Sarah's eyes lit up with pure delight. She joyfully exclaimed that the meal was absolutely delicious. Watching Sarah's reaction, Aqua scoffed, claiming demons clearly have no taste if they enjoy eating wild grass. Summoning her courage, she squeezed her eyes shut and forced a forkful of the greens into her mouth. The moment she tasted it, Aqua's eyes snapped open in sheer amazement. She couldn't believe that such a simple herb could taste this incredible. The goddess immediately began devouring the meal, baffled by how grass could be so savory. Sarah asked Noel if his culinary skills were some kind of legendary hero ability, but he simply laughed, saying it was just normal cooking. Before long, everyone had finished their portions. Aqua let out a satisfied sigh, admitting she was wrong about the grass, while Sarah turned to Noel with a warm smile and thanked him for the wonderful meal. With their bellies full, the mood turned serious as Noel reflected on the betrayal of his former friends. He looked out at the village, thinking about the dilapidated buildings and the hauntingly empty streets. Clearly pained by the memory, Noel looked away and mentioned how the entire village where he first met Sarah had been completely cordoned off following the demon attack. Noel crossed his arms as Sarah somberly added that she'd heard the villagers had abandoned their homes entirely, unable to rebuild their lives after the demons had destroyed everything they owned. After finishing her meal, Aqua stretched lazily, expressing relief that the villagers were safe, yet she still harbored a secret hope that they might one day return to their homes. Noel looked at the hopeful goddess and delivered a dose of cold reality, explaining that such a return was unlikely after a mass migration, causing Aqua's spirits to sink. Heaving a heavy sigh, the earth goddess confessed that she felt incredibly lonely without her people, insisting that Noel shouldn't be so quick to crush her dreams of a reunion. Noel reached out to offer a comforting head pat to the dejected goddess, but she indignantly swatted his hand away, demanding to know what he thought he was doing. With a gentle smile, Noel looked at her and reminded her that this was his hometown as well, declaring that he intended to stay here permanently. Aqua was stunned, asking if a legendary hero like him was truly satisfied with a mundane village life when he could be living like royalty in the capital. Noel crossed his arms confidently, explaining that his life would be anything but ordinary, as his superhuman efficiency allowed him to do the work of 100 men all by himself. He spoke passionately about restoring the village to its former glory, turning to a wide-eyed Aqua to ask if she would join him in his mission. Sarah immediately volunteered to help with the reconstruction, while Noel leaned toward the still-seated Aqua, eagerly awaiting her cooperation. Her sadness instantly vanished as Aqua beamed with pride, declaring that as the local earth goddess, Noel could absolutely count on her divine assistance. The group headed out to the abandoned fields, where Noel noted they needed to revitalize the soil, prompting Aqua to prepare her agricultural magic. She thrust her arms skyward, summoning a massive crest of water to wash over the parched, dead earth and prepare it for planting. Noel started to mention that they still needed seeds, but his words were cut short by an admiring sigh, as Aqua's water perfectly saturated the barren ground. With a triumphant shout, the earth goddess pumped her fist into the air as vibrant green sprouts began to burst through the soil right before their eyes. Noel joked that seedlings don't usually grow quite that fast, but Aqua simply placed her hands on her hips and let out a playful giggle. She pointed to a fresh sprout that had been nothing but dust moments ago, smugly asking Noel to explain how it grew so fast if it wasn't her doing. Noel and Sarah leaned in, amazed by the sudden growth, while a proud Aqua told them they didn't need to be shy about showering her with praise. She explained that other earth deities were lending her their strength because everyone wanted to help the hero, though Noel humbly reminded her he was just a former hero. Aqua just smiled and shook her head, insisting that whether he was a hero of the past or present didn't matter. The gods were all eager to support him. Pointing to herself, Aqua declared that she was his biggest supporter of all, earning a sincere and grateful smile from Noel. After the planting was finished, Aqua turned to Noel and Sarah, declaring that they would restore the village to its former glory before the demon attack. Noel smiled, vowing to make the village even better than before. Aqua enthusiastically offered to pick weeds for breakfast, but Noel indignantly corrected her, insisting they were actually wild herbs. Later, while trekking through the forest, Noel spotted a stray goat. Seizing the opportunity, he quickly fashioned a leash and collar to secure the animal. The goat followed obediently as Noel led the way, with the young man feeling pleasantly surprised to find such a valuable resource wandering deep within the woods. Aqua joined him in the search, eager to find more livestock. Suddenly, she pointed toward a nearby thicket, claiming she had spotted another one. The Earth Goddess wiped the drool from her mouth, already daydreaming about the fresh milk they'd be able to enjoy every single day. Noel pushed through the bushes expecting another goat, but he froze in shock. Instead of an animal, he found an unconscious blonde girl sprawled on the forest floor. He immediately rushed to her side, desperately trying to wake her up and checking to see if she was all right. When she didn't respond, Noel cast a healing spell to mend any hidden injuries, but to his frustration, she remained completely unresponsive. Realizing she needed more than just magic, Noel sighed and hoisted the mysterious girl into his arms, deciding to bring her back home for proper care. Back at the house, Noel tucked her into bed and sat nearby, sharpening his sword as he kept watch. Eventually, the girl's eyes fluttered open as she took in her unfamiliar surroundings. She bolted upright, frantically asking where she was. Noel set his sword aside to reassure her, just as Aqua burst into the room, thrilled to see their guest finally awake. Aqua used her powers to conjure a glass of crystal-clear water for the girl, who took a sip and marveled at its incredibly pure and refreshing taste. As she drank, Noel explained the situation, telling her how he had found her unconscious in the woods and brought her back, fearing she was gravely ill. The girl looked down, explaining that she'd been through a lot lately. She revealed she was staying in a nearby village and had simply gone out for some fresh air. Captivated by the suddenly pristine air and the beauty of nature, she had wandered into the forest, only to trip over a root and knock herself unconscious. After explaining her clumsy accident, she admitted she was starving, having not eaten in far too long. Sympathetic to her plight, Noel offered to whip up a meal. Noel glanced at his sword, theorizing that breaking Aqua's demonic seals had purified the environment, which was likely why the girl had been drawn outside. Aqua agreed, noting that the divine water she restored to the parched earth had likely revitalized the entire region's atmosphere. With the mystery solved, the girl introduced herself as Sonia and gave Noel a heartfelt smile, thanking him for being her savior. To prepare their meal, the group decides to milk the goat Noel recently brought home. While Aqua handles the task with a smile, Sonia stands ready with the milk bottles. Watching Sonia assist Aqua, Noel remarks on what a kind-hearted girl she is, noting how effortlessly she managed to bond with the eccentric goddess. Sarah quietly agrees, but her downcast gaze and somber tone immediately tip Noel off that something is bothering her. She confesses her lingering fear of Goodal, her former master. She worries that if she doesn't return, he'll send enforcers who could put the entire village in jeopardy. Noel offers a reassuring word, promising they'll find a way to handle Goodal, just as Sonia approaches to offer them a fresh glass of milk. Sarah enjoys the drink, and Noel is relieved to see the simple gesture successfully distract her from the traumatic memories of her cruel former master. Suddenly, a hyperactive Aqua bounds over to Sonia, declaring that the goddess of the earth is challenging her to a race all the way to the river. Noel warns Aqua not to push her since she hasn't fully recovered yet, but the goddess ignores him, stubbornly hugging Sonia in protest. Sonia's expression softens into a look of melancholy as she admits that while she may look fine, her internal emotional wounds have yet to heal. Sensing the shift in mood, Aqua immediately asks if Sonia is willing to open up about her pain, catching the girl completely by surprise. Biting her lip to suppress her emotions, Sonia begins to tremble, her eyes welling with tears as she's overwhelmed by Aqua's genuine concern. With her voice cracking from heartache, Sonia finally reveals the source of her sorrow. Her fiancé has called off their engagement. The dam finally breaks as Sonia sobs, explaining that the entire capital was gossiping about her failed engagement until the humiliation became unbearable. Shielding her face, she confesses she fled the capital in shame, prompting Sarah and Alex to lash out at the unknown man for his sheer stupidity and cruelty. After regaining some composure, Sonia drops a bombshell, revealing that her former fiancé is the very hero who defeated the Demon Lord. Noel, Sarah, and Aqua are left utterly speechless, staring at her in disbelief after learning she was betrothed to the world's greatest champion. Aqua eventually breaks the silence by elbowing Noel, jokingly telling him to fix his shocked expression because he looks absolutely ridiculous. Shaking off the shock, Noel turns to Sonia and asks for confirmation. Was her former fiancé actually Prince Cain? Sonia confirms it, tearfully explaining that the prince left her for the saint he served with. And to make matters worse, the two are already expecting a child. Sonia breaks down, lamenting that they hadn't even held hands before he abandoned her, while the rest of the group brands Cain, the ultimate enemy of women. After Noel complimented Sonia's cuteness, Aqua and Sarah froze in stunned silence. Realizing his slip-up, Noel quickly regained his composure, clearing his throat awkwardly and adopting a serious expression. Noel then dropped a bombshell, explaining that Sonia's former fiancé was now engaged to Saint Stella, the fraudulent hero. Sonia, processing this, looked at Noel with a mix of confusion and curiosity. Noel confirmed the bitter truth, and the realization finally hit Sonia. Prince Cain was a total fraud. Amidst the tension, Aqua piped up, declaring that Noel was the true hero all along. Noel admitted that the situation was complicated and didn't expect Sonia to believe him immediately, but she quickly cut him off, stating that since the Earth Goddess herself vouched for him, she had no choice but to believe. Gazing at the peaceful scenery and the goats grazing in the fields, Sonia marveled at the village's beauty and tentatively asked if she could remain there. She noted that unlike the prince, a true hero like Noel lived a humble life without seeking glory. Bowing her head in gratitude, Sonia expressed how deeply moved she was by his genuine kindness. Crossing his arms, Noel replied that while he was happy to have her, the decision to stay had to be hers alone. He then voiced his concern, asking if her family would worry about her sudden disappearance. As Aqua pulled her into a hug, Sonia admitted she wasn't sure how her family would react to her living in such a remote place, but she intended to seek their formal permission regardless. Hearing her commitment, Noel's stern demeanor melted into a warm smile as he officially welcomed her to the village, much to Sonia's delight. Sometime later, Sarah burst into the room to showcase her brand new outfit. Fidgeting with her clothes, she shyly asked Aqua for his honest opinion on her new look. Aqua took a good look and enthusiastically praised the costume, causing a flustered Sarah to stammer in disbelief at the sudden compliment. Watching from the floor, Sonia giggled and reminded Sarah that every woman deserves to feel beautiful, prompting a grateful smile from the young girl. Noel was equally impressed, admitting they had no idea Sonia was so gifted. Surrounded by needles and thread, Sonia explained that embroidery was a standard skill for high-born ladies, which is how she became so proficient. With a determined smile, Sonia vowed to use her skills to help rebuild the village after the devastating demon attack, hoping to create a home for the returning residents. Noel placed his hands on his hips and noted how much healthier Sonia looked now compared to the exhausted girl he first rescued, a sentiment she wholeheartedly agreed with. Deep in the forest, a mysterious man stumbled upon the carcass of the Hydra Noel had slain to save Sarah. He stood frozen in awe, wondering what kind of powerhouse could take down such a legendary beast. Later that afternoon, Noel was out in the fields, diligently tilling the soil with a hoe to prepare the land for a future harvest that would feed the entire village. As he worked, the armored man who had discovered the Hydra approached him from behind. Remarking on how the abandoned village was finally seeing life again, he caught Noel's attention, causing him to stop and turn around. Noel immediately recognized the man as his old friend, Gersus. Gersus was equally stunned, staring at Noel in disbelief and asking what on earth he was doing in a place like this. Noel invited him inside, where Gersus explained he was on a mission to find the Knight Commander's missing daughter. However, the explanation was cut short when Gersus spotted Sonia sitting right there at the table. Gersus rushed over the moment he realized it was actually Sonia. Startled, she exhaled in surprise, noting how long it had been since they last saw one another. Shocked to find her in this remote village, Gersus explained that her disappearance had left the entire mansion in absolute chaos. Overwhelmed with guilt, Sonia admitted she knew the trouble she'd caused and offered a sincere apology. Noel watched Sonia closely, his hands on his hips as he processed the revelation. He'd always suspected she was high-born since she was the prince's bride, but he never expected her to be the daughter of a legendary commander. Sonia didn't deny it, confirming that Gersus was telling the truth. She was indeed the daughter of the great commander, Gushar Almaty. Aqua tilted her head curiously, asking if being a commander was actually a big deal. Noel clarified that it was the highest, most influential rank within the entire army. Gersus gave Sonia a small smile, telling her how worried her family had been during her absence. Without hesitation, he urged her to return home with him immediately. However, Sonia hesitated, guiltily confessing that she had no desire to return home yet. Despite her family's expectations, she wanted to stay and help the village, leaving Gersus utterly stunned by her refusal. Still struggling to wrap his head around the situation, the knight demanded an explanation from Noel. Noel calmly explained that while they'd discussed her staying, she would still need her family's formal permission. Gersus sighed, realizing the logic in his words. Just then, the door swung open as Sarah burst in, loudly announcing her return. Noel turned his attention away from Gersus to greet her with a warm smile. He noted how pleased she looked to be back, and Sarah proudly bragged about the massive catch she'd landed that day. Gersus, however, remained silent, watching Sarah with a suspicious, cold gaze. When Noel and Gersus stepped outside together, Noel reminisced about their old adventuring days before asking if Gersus had truly joined the military. Gersus confirmed his new role with a solemn nod. Closing his eyes, Gersus explained that his new superior had assigned him a high-stakes mission, which was the real reason he had traveled to this region. He told Noel that while he'd heard rumors of Sonia being in a nearby village, his arrival at her last known location was met with total chaos and frantic maids claiming she was nowhere to be found. Noel smiled, noting that despite the weight of his official mission, Gersus's first priority was still Sonia's safety. It was a classic trait of the man Noel had known for years. Gersus frowned, retorting that Noel was the one who had changed, seeing as he was now playing bodyguard to a girl he barely even knew. The knight pointed out that Noel wasn't just protecting Sonia, but a demon girl as well. Noel's guard immediately went up, knowing Gersus was referring to Sarah. Gersus looked down, admitting his current task was a grim one, but he was committed to his goal. With a chilling deliberation, he slowly began to draw his blade from its scabbard. Stunned by the sudden shift in tension, Noel watched as his old friend drew his sword. He demanded to know what had brought on this sudden aggression. Gersus revealed that Sarah was a demon with a dangerous directive. He questioned why she was living under Noel's roof, to which Noel replied that it was simply a matter of circumstance. Suddenly, Gersus leveled his sword at Noel's throat. He declared that his true mission was to ensure the demon was actually working, and Noel's next words would determine if things turned bloody. Noel stated firmly that he knew Sarah's true purpose was to erase every trace of his existence, and that he only protected her because she was a puppet following someone else's will. Gersus remained unmoved by his former friend's words, keeping his blade leveled at Noel. He boasted that his commander served alongside the hero who slew the demon lord, quickly rising to the absolute peak of the military. Gersus claimed his new master was so powerful, he was a prime candidate for commander-in-chief of the knightly order. Noel looked down, his mind racing as he processed the threat posed by this man, Goodal. Tightening his grip on his sword, Gersus warned that failure wasn't an option. If the mission failed, the consequences would be catastrophic for everyone, as his master was not a man who forgave mistakes. Noel met the gaze of the knight who chose duty over their lifelong bond, declaring with unwavering resolve that he was prepared to face the master's fury. Gersus froze in disbelief, his sword trembling. He never imagined Noel would defy him and his master for the sake of a demon girl, asking if he'd truly stand his ground against an entire army. Unfazed by the prospect of fighting an entire legion to save Sarah, Noel looked him in the eye and gave a simple, firm confirmation. In that instant, the knight braced his stance to strike. Noel narrowed his eyes, preparing for a clash with a man who was stubbornly bound by his sense of duty. However, seeing that Noel wouldn't back down despite the looming threat of death, Gersus remained rooted to the spot, his blade held motionless in front of him. Finally, he exhaled a heavy sigh and lowered his weapon. Scratching the back of his head, the tension drained from his body as he admitted he finally understood the depth of Noel's resolve to save Sarah. Gersus muttered that it was madness to side with a demon girl, reminding Noel that Sarah was merely a weapon. But Noel dropped a bombshell. He had already broken the slave collar from her neck. The knight stared at him, completely shell-shocked. He stammered, asking how a human could possibly remove such a powerful seal, only for Noel to calmly remind him that he was, in fact, the hero. Seeking a more private place to talk, Noel brought him home. There, Gersus finally shed his armor and relaxed, but his jaw dropped when Noel placed the broken collar on the table as proof. Noel pulled back his chair, the discarded collar sitting between them like a heavy secret. As Gersus examined the artifact in disbelief, Noel asked if he finally had the evidence he needed to believe the truth. Gersus picked up the collar, his expression turning grave. He admitted that whoever removed this was no ordinary man, though Noel insisted that he was now just a simple villager, not the hero of legend. Looking up from the metal, Gersus conceded that Noel might live like a peasant now, but he couldn't help but ask what a legendary warrior was doing hiding in a place like this. Gersus sat down as Noel began the real story, how he and his party truly defeated the Demon Lord, only to be betrayed so Prince Cain could steal the glory. As Noel spoke, Gersus listened while nursing a drink, but by the end of the tale, he was seething with rage. He slammed his mug onto the table, splashing liquid everywhere as he cursed the injustice. He buried his face in his hand, admitting he knew something was off about sending a demon girl to destroy an already ruined village, but he never suspected such a dark conspiracy. Once the knight regained his composure, Noel looked him in the eye and asked for a favor. Gersus met his gaze, nodding solemnly and signaling that he was ready to listen. After a heavy conversation revealed the king's web of lies, Noel stepped outside to find Sarah. He delivered the news. Sonia was heading back to the mansion. A stunned Sarah listened as Noel explained that Sonia needed to clarify the fake hero fiasco to the authorities. Naturally, Sarah wondered who would protect her on the journey. Noel reassured the demoness that Gersus, his trusted companion from his days as a researcher, would act as her escort. In fact, Gersus had already arrived specifically to collect her. With the explanation finished, Noel shifted gears and offered to help Sarah process the game she had caught. Delighted by the gesture, Sarah thanked him and accepted his help. Suddenly, a small hand yanked on Noel's sleeve, halting him in his tracks. It was Aqua, and she was clearly devastated about Sonia's departure, demanding to know when her friend would return. Looking down at the pouting earth goddess, Noel could see her heart break. He gently explained that Sonia needed her commander's official permission to return, a process that could take quite a while. When Aqua asked if Noel was leaving too, he confirmed he was staying behind. As Sarah hauled in another deer carcass, Noel smiled, noting that Gersus had a very different mission to complete. Later that night, Gersus returned to his master, Goodal, who had tasked him with tracking down Sarah's whereabouts. This investigation was a top priority for the corrupt noble. Gersus stood before his master and lied through his teeth, claiming the demon girl had been lethally wounded during a fierce struggle with a hydra and didn't survive. Lounging on his sofa with a glass of wine, Goodal scoffed, calling the demoness useless. He expressed frustration, as she was supposedly one of the demon lord's finest soldiers. Maintaining his composure, Gersus argued that the hydra made the territory nearly inaccessible, making Sarah's supposed demise inevitable. To seal the lie, the knight placed Sarah's collar on the table as proof of her death. In reality, Noel had removed it, but Goodal fell for the ruse, praising Gersus for retrieving the artifact. Having successfully deceived his master at Noel's request, Gersus requested permission to withdraw, his mission officially completed. Once alone, Goodal brooded over his wine, staring intently at the collar. He was still irritated that he hadn't managed to completely erase every trace of Noel's existence from the world. He eventually broke into a sinister grin, realizing that with a hydra guarding the area, no one would dare set foot near Noel's village anyway. With that thought, he erupted into mad laughter. Meanwhile, Sarah asked Noel what had become of the collar he'd taken off her. Noel explained that Gersus suggested using it as physical evidence to fake her death. Noel beamed, telling Sarah that since Goodal believed she was dead, he would never hunt her again. Finally, the demoness was truly free, a realization that brought a soft smile to her face. Sarah looked up, her eyes filled with genuine gratitude as she thanked Noel once more. She made sure to voice her appreciation for Gersus' help as well, indebted to both men for her new life. Elsewhere, Aqua was already suffering from Sonia withdrawal, begging for her friend's speedy return. Noel joked that Sonia was probably just eager to get back and bake them a pie. On their first night back in the village, Noel and Sarah watched in disbelief as Aqua sprawled out across the entire bed. As she slept in a bizarre heap, Noel grumbled that there was no room left for him. Noel grumbled in frustration as Aqua completely hogged the bed, leaving him with nowhere to sleep. Realizing his house was officially over capacity, he prepared to settle for a spot on the floor. Grabbing his pillow, he told Sarah she could take his bed instead, mentioning he could easily make do with a folding cot in another room. Sarah's eyes snapped open at the suggestion. The idea of Noel suffering in the living room while she took his bed was something she simply couldn't allow. She snatched the pillow from his hands, insisting that as the homeowner, he shouldn't be the one displaced. She firmly declared that she would be the one sleeping in the living room instead. Caught off guard by her stubbornness, Noel scratched his head and offered a compromise. If she didn't mind, they could just share the bed so no one had to suffer on the couch. Relieved that the living room was no longer an option, Sarah enthusiastically agreed, claiming she had no issues sharing the blankets with him. However, as soon as the lights went out, regret set in. While Noel drifted off peacefully, Sarah lay there wide awake, her heart racing from the sheer embarrassment of their proximity. When morning finally came, a well-rested Noel noticed Sarah's exhausted expression. He asked if she'd slept at all, to which she sheepishly replied that looking tired was just her natural state. The day after Sonia left to reveal the truth about the hero, the morning peace was shattered by Aqua's indignant shouting. Apparently, their magic oven had decided to quit working. Noel examined the appliance, noting that while it looked fine on the outside, the internal magical components were completely missing. Elle noted how inconvenient the situation had become. He explained that repairing such delicate magic parts was nearly impossible, a revelation that sent Aqua into a state of utter despair as she begged for a solution. Noel tilted his head, skeptically admitting that while he could attempt a repair, he couldn't guarantee the oven would ever bake again. Seizing that tiny glimmer of hope, Aqua began desperately begging him to try. Realizing he wasn't going to get any peace otherwise, Noel gave a heavy sigh and agreed to the task. Right then, Gersus appeared behind them, returning from the mission Noel had entrusted to him. He curiously asked why they were huddled around a broken oven. Noel greeted him with a smile, thanking him for successfully convincing Goodal that Sarah was dead. Gersus brushed it off, stating that helping a friend required no thanks. As they sat down for a drink, Gersus's tone shifted. He asked if Noel remembered Ina, the girl who betrayed him and became a court magician after the demon lord's defeat. Noel's expression hardened. He remembered her well. She was the one who actually fought by his side, unlike Prince Cain. That's when Gersus dropped a bombshell. Ina had been imprisoned. Noel was stunned. Knowing Ina's fierce pride and immense power, he couldn't imagine anyone being able to lock her away so easily. Meanwhile, Sonia made her way through a windswept field toward an ancient, abandoned cemetery. There, she spotted a lone girl staring silently at a weathered grave. Clutching a basket of flowers, Sonia asked if the girl was a local. The girl shook her head, explaining she was simply visiting an old friend who had perished on a dangerous mission. Sonia realized with a jolt that the grave the girl was visiting actually belonged to her supposedly deceased friend, Noel. Brushing off the tension with an awkward smile, Sonia invited the stranger back for tea, hoping to swap stories since they were both newcomers to this desolate village. The girl accepted the invitation, and soon Sonia led her back to the house. Bursting through the door, Sonia announced her return, while the mysterious girl followed close behind, eyeing the place with curiosity. Noel was chatting with Aqua when he heard Sonia return. He turned to greet his friend, but froze the moment his eyes landed on the girl standing behind her. It was Ina. Ina stood paralyzed, her eyes widening as she recognized Noel instantly. Sonia looked between the two of them in utter confusion, demanding to know how they could possibly be acquainted. Trembling with sheer shock, Ina realized the friend she had mourned was standing right in front of her. Her grip failed, and the bouquet she was holding crashed to the floor. Tears flooded her eyes as she pressed a shaking hand to her lips, struggling to process the fact that Noel had been alive this entire time. Suddenly, Ina collapsed to her knees, bowing her head in deep shame. Through choked sobs, she apologized for betraying him, admitting she had abandoned her friend for the king's favor and the title of court magician. Visibly uncomfortable with her groveling, Noel looked away and shielded his face with his hand. He softly urged Ina to lift her head and look him in the eye. As she looked up, Noel leaned in and asked if her betrayal was all for the sake of that fraudulent hero, Prince Cain, while Aqua watched the tense exchange in silence. Ina clenched her fists in despair, explaining that the king had manipulated them into erasing the true hero's legacy. He claimed the people needed a royal hero like the prince to maintain hope in the kingdom. Infuriated by the betrayal, Aqua loomed over the girl, accusing her of selling her soul just to become a court magician. Ina could only flinch, unable to deny the weight of her choice. Noel placed a calming hand on Aqua's head, telling her to back off. He defended Ina, noting that her promotion wasn't surprising given her exceptional performance back when they were a team. Fresh tears welled up as Ina looked down, admitting that even back then, Noel was the one doing all the heavy lifting. She confessed that it was Noel who truly defeated the Demon Lord, not her or the others. Once she regained her composure, Noel pulled out a chair for her, inviting her to sit and explain everything. He couldn't help but notice how much she had changed from the girl he once knew. Noel crossed his arms, reminiscing about how Ina used to be so brazen and self-assured that she'd constantly boss him around. Ina sat in silence, her head hung low as the memories flooded back. Rubbing his forehead, Noel questioned why she had been treated like a prisoner instead of a respected mentor. When he asked if he was right about her situation, Ina jumped in shock. Leaping from her chair, she stared at him in disbelief, demanding to know how he could possibly have known about her imprisonment. Her energy vanished as she slumped back into her seat. She muttered bitterly that despite her high hopes and talent, she had utterly failed to live up to the duties of a court magician. On the day of her appointment, she was dealt a crushing blow. As a mentor, she was strictly forbidden from ever using combat magic again, leaving her devastated. The mage explained the nature of her future work, noting that with the Demon Lord gone, utility magic was now the standard for serving the public. Smiling from beneath her hood, she questioned if Ina could adapt, given her reliance on combat magic that was now strictly forbidden. Ina looked at her in shock before hanging her head in shame, confessing to Noel that she felt utterly worthless. She muttered that she had spent her life honing her combat skills for the war, leaving her completely ignorant of the basic magic required for peace. Court magicians were expected to handle mundane tasks like repairing churches, but while others succeeded with ease, Ina struggled to keep up. Despite her best efforts, she failed every practical exam, eventually realizing her hands were built only for battle, not for restoration. Noel listened quietly as his friend repented for her betrayal, finally understanding the true reason she had abandoned her post at the palace. Suddenly, she looked up with newfound resolve, declaring there was an even darker reason why she had fled her prestigious position. Staring directly into Noel's eyes, she revealed that Prince Cain's scheme to usurp the title of hero had been orchestrated from the very beginning. She dropped a bombshell. The original plan was to assassinate the true hero immediately after the Demon Lord's defeat, so Cain could steal the glory. Noel stood frozen, reeling from the realization that his reward for saving the world was supposed to be a knife in the back. The goal was to manufacture a hero the people would adore, solidifying the prince's grip on the throne, leaving Noel to wonder if Ina had known all along. Ina looked away guiltily, explaining that she only discovered the truth recently through classified information available only to the elite court mages. As a high-ranking magician, she had gained access to a confidential document that laid out the kingdom's entire conspiracy in detail. Noel rubbed his chin in deep thought, wondering if returning to the capital under these circumstances was a death wish. Through tears, Ina confessed that she originally came to find him just to apologize for her selfish betrayal and for choosing her career over their bond. She admitted that before learning of the assassination plot, she had been blinded by ambition, unaware of how cruelly the king had deceived the real hero. Looking down, she whispered that she had actually come to his village to build a memorial, believing he had already been killed. Bowing so low her head nearly hit the table, Ina poured out her gratitude for everything he'd done, begging for his forgiveness. After their heavy conversation, Noel led Ina to one of the many dilapidated houses in the village, leaving her stunned by its ruinous state. Noel looks Ina in the eye and tells her that if she truly wants to atone for her betrayal after everything they've been through, she'll have to rebuild every single ruin in this village. Ina is stunned by the monumental task, attempting to object since she only knows combat magic, but Noel cuts her off before she can finish. He silently raises his hand and activates a powerful restoration spell. Instantly, the debris begins to shift, and the house returns to its original state, as if the demon attack never happened. Ina stares at the pristine house in disbelief. Even elite court magicians rarely possess such high-level restoration magic. Still, she hesitates, feeling she lacks the skill to replicate it. Standing behind her with his hands on his hips, Noel calmly promises to teach her everything she needs to know before she heads home. Startled, she turns to face him, eyes wide with surprise. With a warm smile, he offers her a place to stay while she works on the village, noting that since they're old friends, he doesn't mind. especially since his house is already getting crowded. Overwhelmed by Noel's unwavering kindness despite her past actions, tears stream down Ina's face. She hides her eyes and offers a heartfelt thanks for his mercy and shelter. Suddenly, the Earth Goddess rushes over, tugging on Noel's jacket with a pout. She's clearly annoyed and wants to pull his attention away from Ina and back to her. Aqua urgently reminds him of another task he'd overlooked. Realizing she's right, Noel turns his focus to her and tells Ina to come along and help out. Soon, Ina helps them repair the oven, allowing Sonia and Aqua to bake a fresh batch of cookies. As they finish, Sarah walks in, drawn by the delicious aroma wafting through the house. Sonia asks the Earth Goddess to gather Noel and the others for a tea party to sample their fresh-baked treats. Aqua happily agrees and bounces off to find them. Deep in the forest, two warriors stand face to face, swords drawn and ready for a duel. The young man attempts to sheath his blade, but his opponent suddenly lunges forward, catching him completely off guard. The man strikes, but Noel manages to draw his sword just in time to parry the blow. With a stern expression, the man tells him it's time to test his resolve. Raising his sword once more, the man prepares to attack again, fully intent on fighting with everything he's got. Watching from the sidelines, the girl realizes the man is her father. She tries to rush in and stop them, but someone grabs her arm, telling her to wait and watch. She frantically asks Gersus why her father and Noel are clashing as the two warriors continue their intense exchange before her eyes. Gersus hesitates, struggling to find the right words, before simply explaining that circumstances led them to this confrontation. Later, with horses tied up outside, the group gathers around a table. The man who was just fighting Noel offers his sincere gratitude for saving his daughter's life. Noel brushes off the praise, insisting he didn't do anything special, noting that she's been a great help to the village anyway. The man's tone shifts to serious as he questions Noel about Sonia's labor, and Noel confirms that her help was vital due to their worker shortage. Misinterpreting the situation, Sonia's father erupts in anger, accusing the young man of merely using her for his own gain. A perplexed Noel clarifies that she stayed of her own volition, but the man refuses to listen, slamming his palm against the table in a fit of rage. He stands abruptly, gripping his sword and challenging Noel to a duel, demanding the boy arm himself for a lesson. Gersus watches in shock as the commander invokes the sacred laws of the knightly order, insisting that Noel's blade must do the talking now. The scene shifts to the forest where the duel begins, with Sonia's father bracing himself for a fierce exchange. Claiming he's seen enough to judge Noel's character, the commander commands him to unleash his true skills and strike first with his royal blade. Noel remains silent, leveling his sword as the commander scoffs at the weapon's reputation, only to be silenced when Noel lunges forward with blinding speed. In a single devastating clash, Noel shatters the commander's sword into 1,000 pieces, gliding past the stunned warrior as the dust settles. Turning back, Noel offers a humble apology, admitting he might have put a bit too much effort into that single strike. Back at the house, the atmosphere softens over a feast, as Sonia's father admits he never expected to find a master swordsman in a backwater village. He notes that with talent like that, Noel could have admirers across the globe, questioning why he chose to rot in the middle of nowhere. Noel awkwardly explains that after everything he's been through, he finally found his true calling right here in this village. The commander scoffs, calling it a waste of potential, and claiming he would have recruited Noel into the knighthood himself if they'd met sooner. However, as he takes a bite of the local food, his expression shifts from arrogance to pure, unadulterated shock. He stares at the spread, mesmerized by the quality of the vegetables and wondering how such produce could come from this soil. He's reminded of the strength needed by those on the front lines, noting how the refreshing sweetness of the food could revitalize even the most weary soldier. With a satisfied grin, he declares the meal superior to anything found in the capital, making the village's cuisine a worthy reason for a return trip. Sonia approaches with a tray, crediting the village's pure water and the blessings of the goddess Aqua for their bountiful harvest. Her father's eyes light up at the sight of the meat pie she presents, touched that his daughter went through the trouble of baking it just for him. As Sonia slices the pie, her father is stunned to learn she baked it herself. She explains that she mastered the craft years ago, thanks to the guidance of her mother and the estate maids. Memories of her culinary training flood back as she tells him she had always hoped he'd taste her cooking on his birthday. Sonia recalls countless nights sitting alone at a massive table, Her father was always too busy with his duties to ever make it home to see her progress. Gersus adopts a solemn tone, explaining that as the head of the military, the commander endured immense hardships to protect the realm. Sonia meets his gaze, asserting that she hasn't been a naive child for a very long time. As a hand reaches for a slice of the savory pie, Gersus reminds her that, in their world, a soldier's duty must occasionally take precedence over their own kin. Turning to Noel, Sonia acknowledges that her father's burden is vital. Protecting the kingdom means securing its future, making his sacrifices necessary. Sonia's father finally takes a bite of the meat pie, and his eyes light up as he declares the flavor absolutely magnificent. Having already devoured half the slice, the man offers a sincere apology to his daughter for the years of isolation he forced upon her. Looking her in the eye, he vows to finally prioritize his family, asking Sonia if she'd be willing to keep baking these meat pies for him. Sonia is left speechless by the sudden change of heart, while a stunned Gersus asks for confirmation. The commander gives a firm, resolute nod. His mind drifts to a long-haired warrior in heavy armor. Though he was ordered to pass his authority to Goodal, he harbors deep reservations about the man's character. He sighs, admitting he tried to delay the inevitable, but the time for the transition has arrived. Hearing the name, Noel repeats it under his breath. Goodal. Gersus bolts upright, warning the commander that if Goodal takes control of the military, the entire nation is doomed, a fact he knows all too well from personal experience. The commander admits he shares that gut feeling, but explains he cannot defy the king's direct decree based on mere intuition alone. As Noel observes the tense exchange amidst the storage barrels, Sonia's father begins to reveal his true thoughts. Noel asks if Goodal is truly that repulsive, but Gersus pivots, praising Noel as a genuine hero instead. He notes that Noel's masterful swordsmanship clearly stems from the knightly order's elite style. Sonia's father adds that Noel's eloquence shouldn't overshadow the weight of their family heirloom, prompting an apology from the young hero. The commander's expression hardens as he concludes that if Noel's assessment is correct, he simply cannot entrust the nation's safety to someone like Goodal. Nearby, an elf girl glances at the shelves and asks Sonia if Noel has finally finished his private discussion with her father. Sonia beams, confirming that not only is the talk over, but it seems her father has finally given Noel his official seal of approval. Sonia glances at the girl, who remains remarkably composed. When Sonia asks if she was worried about the duel, the girl just gives her a puzzled look. Sonia explains that Noel and her father were fighting for real. She knows her father's strength firsthand. He climbed the ranks of the knights through sheer skill alone. Even against a hero, he's a dangerous man. To Sonia's surprise, the girl just laughs. She reminds her of the Hydra, a multi-headed nightmare that usually requires 2 full detachments of knights just to scratch. With a confident smile, she asks Sonia a simple question. Does she really think anyone could seriously threaten the man who took down a Hydra all by himself? Nearby, the fields are flourishing. The commander remarks on how lush the land has become, finding it hard to believe this village was a ghost town just weeks ago. Noel insists it was a team effort. The commander turns serious, asking Noel if the others chose to settle here solely because of his presence. With a humble expression, Noel explains that his only goal was to build a peaceful sanctuary where everyone could finally belong. Nearby, the girls are enjoying the fruits of their labor. One sips a drink in delight while the others tend to the livestock. The elf girl sighs as she holds up a massive hare she caught. Gersus looks on, stunned by the sheer size of the creature's fur. Noel smiles at the commander, assuring him that even if these people lose everything elsewhere, they'll always have a home waiting for them here. The commander admits he once thought it was a waste for a hero of Noel's caliber to squander his potential on a tiny village. Looking Noel in the eye, the seasoned warrior confesses the truth. He's actually envious of the young man's pure, unwavering ambition. Standing amidst the crops, the commander declares that if he wants to protect the dreams of the youth, he'd better put in some work himself. In front of a beautiful manor, Sonia tells her father he's welcome back any time, especially if he's craving some of her famous pie. He asks if she'll bake for him at home, but Sonia admits she has others she wants to cook for now. With a knowing look, the commander turns to Noel. The man offers a firm handshake, asking Noel to look after his daughter. Without hesitation, Noel gives him his word. As they prepare the horses, the commander remarks to Gersus that Noel's heart is in the right place, and Gersus couldn't agree more. As the knights ride off, the group watches from the path. Noel admits he's never met someone so dependable, while one of the girls celebrates the day's successful hunt. Sonia beams, revealing that she's finished sewing new outfits not just for Sarah, but for Aqua and Noel as well. Noel thanks her as he takes the new gear. Eager to see the results, the girls head off to try them on, with Sonia demanding a full fashion show afterward. Blushing, the girl looks down at herself and remarks that there's barely enough fabric here to qualify as clothing. She lifts the hem, noting the underwear is basically just a ribbon, while the other girl frantically tells her to put it down before she exposes herself. Sonia praises how well the outfit suits Aqua, though Aqua secretly realizes Sonia has some pretty questionable tastes in fashion. Suddenly, our protagonist walks in wearing a similarly revealing costume, asking if he looks good, leaving everyone in the room completely speechless. He's immediately dragged out to change, being scolded that it's a disgrace for a noble to wear such things, though he insists it was meant for Sonia anyway. The scene shifts to a lavish room where a tall lamp glows softly beside a beautifully decorated window. A maid brings a fresh mug of tea to Prince Cain, bowing respectfully as he graciously accepts the drink with a smile. Looking out toward the city, the prince mentions that their new mansion is finally nearing completion. The girl is overjoyed by the news, and Cain charms her further by saying her smile is enough to motivate anyone, and her tea is even better. The peaceful moment is shattered when a long-haired man storms in, cursing about some weirdo he just encountered. Cain remains calm, casually asking the frustrated man what could have possibly ruined his mood. An infuriated Goodal reveals that the commander has once again delayed the official transfer of his military powers. Goodal accuses Cain of ignoring the king's orders, suggesting the delay is only happening because the commander is the father of Cain's ex-fiancée. Taken aback by the accusation, Cain quickly denies it, insisting that personal feelings have nothing to do with the situation. Cain explains that the commander is deeply loved by his men, and if they force a transition too quickly, the knights might actually revolt. Goodal demands they use the king's authority to crush any resistance, but the girl snaps at him to stop blaming the prince for the delicate situation. Annoyed, the disgruntled man challenges her, asking if she has a better idea on how to handle the stubborn commander. She asks Cain about the commander's bond with the knightly order, and Cain notes that the man famously treats his soldiers like his own family. The girl realizes that if the order is his family, then his actual daughter, Sonia, is his only real weakness, a realization that leaves Cain confused. She flashes a devious smile, wondering if the commander will still hold on to his post when forced to choose between his career and his daughter. Overlooking the fields, a group of masked men stand poised on a wooded slope, their leader briefly revealing his face. He issues a ruthless command: if anyone interferes, slaughter them all, and his subordinates nod in grim agreement. One bandit rushes forward, hand hovering over his hilt, but he suddenly stops, sensing a presence nearby and demanding to know who's there. Gersus emerges from the shadows, clutching his head and feigning confusion about whether he's even in the right spot. Dismissing him as a lone fool, the masked leader orders his men to finish him off, but when silence follows, he turns back in disbelief. His entire squad is already sprawled across the dirt, incapacitated before they could even draw their weapons. Before he can react, arcs of electricity surge through his body, sending him collapsing to the ground in a fit of agonizing screams. Standing over him is a girl clad in combat gloves, her expression cold as sparks dance between her fingertips. Gersus remarks that this is exactly the skill expected from a hero's party member, while she casually mentions she went easy on them. Gersus looks at Sarah in shock, asking if she took them all out, but she clarifies that Noel did the heavy lifting. He sighs, noting that such overwhelming force is classic Noel, before asking Sarah about the protagonist's current location. Sarah explains they're at the goat pens for feeding time, then orders Gersus to stop lounging around and help her haul the bodies. Under the cover of night, the main character stands by a small fountain, thanking Aqua for her divine assistance in overcoming the threat. Beaming with pride, the goddess laughs, reminding him exactly who it was that blessed this village in the first place. She claims her actions were driven by a pure hatred for evil, a bold statement that only a goddess could make with such confidence. Sonia watches with a smile as Aqua's ego swells, acknowledging that her contribution won't be forgotten by the villagers. With the bandits restrained, the group realizes the leader won't talk easily, but Gersus steps forward with a calm, terrifying resolve. The captured leader begins to panic as Gersus looms over him, trembling as he asks how the warrior managed to return. Gersus ignores the question, demanding to know their true objective in the village, but the bandit remains stubbornly silent. Smacking his fist into his palm, Gersus warns that if he continues to stay silent, he'll have to resort to much tougher methods. Smirking, the girl offers to assist Gersus, wondering aloud just how many lightning strikes their captive can actually endure. The man lifts his head, gazing at her in sheer disbelief as he questions why someone of her stature would even be here. She meets his gaze with total confusion, clearly having no idea who he is as she bluntly demands to know his identity. The man's face lights up with joy, declaring it a supreme honor that the legendary Aina herself would even care to ask for his name. He gushes about her elite lineage and her humble contributions to the hero's party, calling her noble spirit cool. Aina blushes, while Gersus skeptically asks if she isn't just a regular introvert. Still pinned to the ground, the man claims they've been imprisoned in this village, but a skeptical Aina places her hands on her hips and repeats her demand for his purpose. Finally, he confesses that their mission was to rescue the commander's daughter, causing every eye in the room to snap toward Sonia. Shocked, Sonia asks why they'd come for her, clarifying that she's staying here entirely of her own volition. Under the cover of the dark night, the man insists that her willingness to stay is only because she's been brainwashed. Kneeling beside him, Sonia explains that she actually has her father's permission to be here, but the man remains stubbornly unconvinced. After observing the chaos, Noel finally speaks up, noting that while he'd love to hear their story, there's clearly a massive misunderstanding at play. Inside the dimly lit house, the group gathers around a table with a few mugs of water, hoping to settle the matter through a civil discussion. The previously bound man begins detailing their mission, a rescue operation to save Sonia from her supposed captors. While stuffing his face, he explains that Sonia's heart was broken and her mind clouded, so they intended to take her somewhere she could heal after tracking her down via a nearby village. Noel leans in, questioning why anyone would issue an order to abduct her, but the man can only shrug, claiming ignorance regarding the motive. Gersus approaches Noel, warning that reinforcements might be on the way, and stressing the need to identify the mastermind behind this scheme. Noel looks at Gersus with a perfectly composed expression, telling him there's no need to stress over the situation. With a confident smirk, Noel declares that their enemies can try 100 more times if they want, but anyone who dares harm his people will pay a lethal price. While the girls smile at Noel's bravado, Gersus sighs, noting that Noel's confidence alone isn't a strategy. They need a more practical solution. Suddenly, the room falls silent as two figures enter. One of them boldly offers to eliminate the root of the problem, claiming this is a job only a hero can handle. A tall man in glasses and a petite girl suddenly appear, offering to eliminate the root cause, which to them means eliminating the hero. Noah is baffled and asks for their motives, but the girl nonchalantly suggests they start with a nice cup of tea first. As she sits down, the girl begins piling sugar into her cup, apologizing for their sudden and uninvited arrival. Sonia watches in disbelief as the girl adds even more sugar, thanking her hosts for the refreshment. Stunned by the mountain of sweetness, Sonia can only stare as the girl admits she has a massive sweet tooth. Her companion laughs, explaining that her obsession with sugar is a constant habit they've all grown used to. Gersus steps forward, demanding to know who these strangers are, prompting the man to offer a formal apology. With a confident smile, he reveals his identity: Schwarz, the third prince of the kingdom of Schwarz. Gersus is shocked, noting that Schwarz is their closest neighbor, and wonders why royalty would travel all this way. Schwarz explains his goal is to meet Noel personally, eager to see the real hero who took down the Demon King. When a skeptical Noah asks for clarification, Schwarz explains the mask-wearing attackers are part of a much deeper conspiracy. Looking at the aftermath of the battle, Noah realizes that all roads once again lead back to the treacherous Goodal. Schwarz reveals that Commander Garsh is retiring, and Goodal is orchestrating this chaos to seize the title for himself. Gersus asks if Schwarz's real goal is to weaken their military, but the prince insists his intentions are pure. Knowing Schwarz's reputation as a cunning courtier, Gersus finds it hard to believe a man like him came just to see a commoner. His expression hardens as he demands the prince's true objective, but Schwarz remains unreadable. Stirring her tea, the girl chimes in, admitting that while suspicions are natural, the prince isn't the villain they think he is. Taking a calm breath, Schwarz ignores the tension and tells the main character how truly honored he is to finally meet him. He praises the feat of subduing the Demon King, claiming the nobility should be ashamed for letting such a hero's deeds go unsung. Driven by obsession, the prince begs to see Noel's sword skills, but the girl quickly muzzles him, calling him a total fanboy. Schwarz warns Noel that he will never receive the well-deserved title of hero in this corrupt country. The prince gestures broadly, promising that if Noel moves to his kingdom, he'll be granted a dukedom or knighthood without lifting a finger. Schwarz lays it on thick, offering a mountain of awards and a lavish mansion, promising he'll be hailed as a national icon for his exploits. Noel remains calm, asking the prince for one specific guarantee. If he moves to the Tate Kingdom, will the current hero's life be spared? Glancing at the livestock outside, Schwarz assures him he won't have to live in such squalor, while the girls watch Noel with growing concern. When Noel asks if he's truly serious, Schwarz confirms it's all true, and urges him to weigh the offer carefully. However, contrary to the prince's expectations, Noel informs him that if those are his terms, moving is completely pointless. Stunned by the rejection, Prince Schwarz demands to know why Noel would pass up such an incredible opportunity. Noel reaches out, admitting that fame and titles mean nothing to him. It's the people here that truly matter. Turning away, he explains that the trust he's built and the work he does here are all he needs to be satisfied. Noel checks in with Aqua, who firmly tells him that things would never be the same without him, and she'd never forgive him for leaving. Another girl gazes at him longingly, confessing her deep desire to continue living by his side. Noel asks Schwarz if he finally understands their bond, while a girl gently tells the exhausted hero to rest and leave the rest to her. Gersus asks the prince if the girl with the sweet tooth is also from the Schwarz kingdom, and if she shares his noble bloodline. Standing tall, the prince introduces her as the Holy Queen Mitrage, the supreme representative of the holy nation. The group is floored to realize they're in the presence of the church's highest authority, though Noel wonders if there's more to her visit. The queen raises her hand, shifting the focus to a much graver matter, the protection of Sonia. Placing a hand over her heart, the queen makes a shocking confession. She fully intends to conquer this kingdom. Noel and Gersus are left reeling, struggling to process the queen's sudden declaration of war. She clarifies that the royal family must be dismantled for their crimes, stealing the hero's glory and even plotting to take his life. The queen looks them in the eye and boldly declares that in a world devoted to the goddess, sin no longer exists. Schwarz ponders this before agreeing, though he wonders how they could possibly hope to overthrow the king. The young queen explains that the common folk are currently suffering under the weight of the royal family's greed. She points out that Prince Cain and his bride have hiked taxes just to fund their lavish mansion and wedding, all while Cain rides the fame of slaying the demon king. Because of this, the people's resentment has reached a breaking point, and the seeds of a massive riot are beginning to sprout. She stands before Noel, noting that while the rest of the kingdom suffers from massive crop failures, this village's harvest is miraculously thriving. It's clear this abundance is a gift from the earth goddess, and while Aqua stands behind them glowing with pride, her ego is clearly inflating. The queen presents an oracle from the goddess, a divine message calling for the people to finally live in peace. She asserts that the current royal family has forgotten their duty and has officially forfeited their right to rule. If the holy nation intervenes, it would spark a total war, so it's much better to settle this power struggle from within. This is exactly why she sought out the prince's help, and he listens to her proposal in heavy silence. Schwarz then mentions that while gathering intel on the kingdom, they discovered some shady dealings among the local traders. He recalls Cain and his bride, noting that their security is so lax that even commoners are slipping into the royal chambers. Finally, the queen turns to our protagonist and asks him to join their revolution, leaving Noel to weigh his options. Aqua looks at Noel as he admits the current government is a disaster, yet he still refuses to abandon his peaceful village life. Schwarz urges him to reconsider, calling this the perfect chance to take revenge on the king who stole his credit for defeating the demon king. The queen adds that if they succeed, Noel will no longer have to live as a recluse in the middle of nowhere. Despite the promise of restoring his fame, Noel politely declines, stating that he won't compromise his current way of life. Noel tells Schwarz and the queen that no matter how much they debate, they probably won't understand his true motivations. As they stare at him in confusion, he suggests that perhaps a simple dinner together will help them see things from his perspective. Noel turns and invites the group to follow him for a proper tour of the village. As mushrooms sizzle on the grill, the queen samples a skewer, savoring the rich, smoky flavors. Her face lights up with joy, marveling at how such simple, fresh ingredients could taste so divine. Noel tells them to eat their fill, but the queen cheekily passes her bitter vegetables to the prince, who sighs at her childish antics. Prince Schwarz stands among the trees, reflecting on just how incredible the meal truly was. While Aqua and Sonia serve more food, Ina is busy entertaining the masked visitors. Gersus continues grilling, his heart warmed by the sight of everyone enjoying a hearty meal with bright smiles. Looking over the warehouse supplies, Schwarz notes that the Earth Goddess's influence alone shouldn't be this effective. The Queen insists it's because Noel was personally chosen by the goddess as they continue their feast. Taking another bite, the prince admits he never expected such a lavish dinner in a supposedly deserted village. Noel credits Sarah for the bounty just as she arrives, casually hauling a massive pig carcass on her shoulder. Stunned, the prince asks why a demon is living among them, but Sarah just offers a knowing smile. Noel explains that Sarah had nowhere else to turn, so he recruited her to help restore the village to its former glory. The queen asks if Sarah harbors any resentment toward Noel for defeating the Demon King. With a look of absolute conviction, Noel states that past conflicts are no reason to leave someone in need. The queen stares intensely before bursting into laughter, while Dole watches on, completely bewildered. Ina interrupts, pointing out that the masked group has officially sworn to keep the village's existence a secret. Noel thanks her, but Ina wonders if he's being too naive by trusting her word so easily. Noel stands to bring out more dishes, asking the queen if she has room for more, to which she enthusiastically agrees. Watching Noel and Sarah together, Schwarz finally begins to understand why Noel refuses to abandon this place. It's a surreal sight. The very men who recently raided the village are now sitting peacefully and sharing a meal. Prince Schwarz, representing those masked attackers, is right in the middle of it. Schwarz takes a long swig from his mug and remarks with a smirk that Noel's incredible resilience allows him to welcome anyone into his circle. The queen agrees, noting that here, status and race are irrelevant. This village is a rare sanctuary of warmth and friendship, the kind of place you could search a lifetime for and never find. As Noel continues to plow the fields, the queen observes that despite being betrayed by his own kingdom, he possessed the fortitude to build a new life from the ground up. Sarah adds that as long as he carries the legacy of a former hero, he can't truly turn a blind eye to the chaos brewing back in the capital. By the light of a flickering campfire, Sarah confronts Noel about his earlier words. She asks him directly, if he decides to fight for his rightful place, can she remain by his side? Noel pauses while holding a stack of dishes, looking at her intently. He clarifies that he has no intention of getting involved in a violent coup d'etat. He offers her a gentle smile, telling her that as long as it concerns the safety of this village, he would be honored to have her standing with him. Sarah is visibly relieved, promising to be there for him and urging him to rely on her whenever he needs support. She then stumbles over her words, shyly asking if she can stay with him forever. When Noel asks her to repeat herself, she gets embarrassed and quickly drops the subject. Outside, a horse stands ready under the falling leaves. A final slap on its back signals that the preparations for departure are complete. Gersus stands by the horse, rubbing his head in exhaustion as he asks Noel if the Holy Queen and Prince Schwarz have finally left. Noel gives him a simple nod of confirmation. Gersus reports that the counter-offensive will begin the moment they return. As a knight, hearing about these looming hostilities weighs heavily on his conscience. He mentions that the masked anti-assault team is nowhere to be found. Noel explains that they slipped away before dawn to avoid drawing any unnecessary attention. Sonia asks Gersus if her father is truly prepared to fight the Holy Queen. Gersus doubts it, suspecting the commander will likely resign following the fallout of the assassination attempt. He sighs, noting that even a patriot must eventually question if their king is actually worthy of their loyalty before he finally mounts his horse and rides away. Sonia turns back to Noel, her voice filled with uncertainty as she asks what will become of their kingdom now. Noel looks her in the eye and tells her it doesn't matter what happens to the crown. They will continue to build this village together and eliminate anyone who dares to interfere. Sonia falls silent, reflecting on his words. She realizes that even if Noel stays true to himself, the world around them is changing forever. Noel calls her name softly, and she repeats his sentiment back to him, finding comfort in the idea that nothing else matters. Sonia heads home and asks Noel to help with the dishes since they had so many guests, and the guy happily agrees. Later at the mansion, Noel meets with a merchant who is shocked to find that Sonia's important acquaintance is actually just a humble farmer. The merchant admits Noel did him a massive favor, as recent crop failures have made high-quality produce nearly impossible to find. Looking over a pile of vibrant carrots, the merchant expresses his desire to buy more, causing Noel to look up with a plan. Noel asks him to wait, teasing that he has one more thing to offer, leaving the curious merchant smiling in anticipation. Suddenly, a snarling, fanged beast lunges from the side, an arrow already buried deep in its flank. The merchant screams in terror, throwing his hands up just as another arrow whistles through the air and strikes the monster. He collapses to the ground in shock, staring at the beast riddled with arrows as it finally slumps over, dead. Sarah appears with a smirk and a bow, explaining she herded the creature here so she wouldn't have to drag the heavy carcass, a logic the terrified farmer quickly agrees with. Back at the house, a heavy bag of gold is emptied onto the table, the coins shimmering with intricate engravings. Aqua's eyes bulge at the sight, and Noel confirms this is the profit from the vegetables plus the 5,000 gold from Sarah's hunt. Hovering over him, Aqua excitedly asks if they're going to spend the fortune on premium snacks and sweets. To her utter disappointment, Noel casually mentions he's using the funds to buy seeds for the next harvest, causing the girl to sigh in defeat. Noel points out that they need a sustainable way to increase their income if they want the village population to keep growing. As tea is poured into a waiting cup, Aqua notices a peculiar plant and identifies it as a forest poppy. Sonia explains that it's a wild, hallucinogenic plant that fetches a high price, noting it was likely cultivated in this region before. Aqua's eyes turn into dollar signs as she realizes she could buy all the sweets she wants if she finds more, while Noel just stares at her in disbelief. Noel realizes he must have overlooked it during his initial scouting, but Sarah chimes in, raising her hand to share some intel. She mentions a suspicious spot she discovered halfway up the mountain, nestled deep within the surrounding forest. As Sarah points the way, Ina warns them about the hazardous, poisonous fumes rising from the earth in that area. Standing among the dense trees, the group realizes that to cultivate crops, they must first neutralize the toxic fumes. Noel asks Ina if she can help, and she confidently agrees to handle the purification. Ina raises her hand toward the horizon as crackling lightning surges around her, unleashing a powerful cleansing spell to purge the air. Under the dim, overcast sky, Ina asks if the area is finally safe. Noel gives her the thumbs up and signals for the team to move forward. They soon discover a pocket of vibrant, magical flora growing amidst the grass, a breathtaking sight that looks like a divine oasis compared to the surrounding toxic wasteland. Sarah spots something unusual and points out a plant with massive, shimmering petals, earning praise from Ina for her keen eyes. But as soon as Sarah plucks the glowing blossom from the soil, its ethereal light abruptly fades away into nothingness. Sarah stares at the dull plant in confusion, but Noel explains that the flower's magical pulse stops the moment it's severed from the earth. Clutching the extinguished flower, Sarah worriedly asks if the loss of its glow means it will taste worse, and Noel sadly confirms her suspicions. Noel turns to Ina with a serious expression, asking if she has any magical tricks up her sleeve to fix the problem. Ina nods, focusing her power as arcs of lightning dance around her hand, successfully manifesting a restorative aura. Ancient symbols swirl around the flower until it erupts in light once more, leaving Sarah stunned that Ina possesses such versatile magic. Ina prepares to apply frost magic as well, but Noel warns her to only chill the plant. If she freezes it solid, the flavor will be ruined. This cooling process ensures the flowers stay fresh for the long journey back, and the radiant harvest is carefully tucked into their basket. Noel suggests there are more nearby, and as Ina offers to enchant the rest of their haul, Sarah announces she's already found the next batch. Soon, the basket is overflowing with shimmering flowers, but the constant spell casting leaves Ina collapsed on the ground, her mana completely spent. Noel gently pats Ina's head to comfort her, telling the exhausted girl to rest while he goes to scout for a nearby river to collect water. Sitting on a nearby stone, Sarah remarks that they've reached their goal thanks to Ina's magic, but Ina awkwardly admits that Noel is actually capable of the same spells. Sarah is shocked by the news, but Ina recalls Noel's true power in his heavy armor, remembering how he carried the weight of the world during the fight against the Demon King. With a faint smile, Ina realizes that while Noel doesn't technically need her help, he purposefully lets her handle the magic so she feels useful. Sarah thinks back to her hunt and realizes the same thing. Noel could have easily killed the beast himself, yet he held back to let her take the shot. Ina asks Sarah if their foundation is built purely on trust, since no one else seems to believe in the tasks they've been given. Sarah recalls Noel's meeting with the Queen, Though he rejected her offer back then, Sarah found it difficult to believe at the time. Gazing at the flower in her hands, she admits she once thought he should have accepted for the sake of the common good. She wonders if this means Noel truly trusts the Holy Queen and the people, or if he's placing his faith in something else entirely. Ina shrugs, speculating that Noel simply wants to shield himself and those he cares about from the devastation of war. Blushing slightly, Sarah asks if it's because he finally has allies who are ready to fight by his side, shoulder to shoulder. Noel returns with water and notices Sarah's bright red face, but she quickly flusters and insists that nothing is wrong. Once they return home, Sonia surprises everyone by serving a plate of flower petals she's battered and fried. The girls dig in, with Ina praising the flavor while a beaming Aqua claims the taste is so divine her cheeks are melting. Noel admires the flowers with a sense of wonder, daydreaming about the possibility of cultivating them himself. Sonia mentions a farmer's warning that growing them is impossible without pure spring water, which makes Sarah think. Suddenly, all eyes turn to Aqua. Noel rests a hand on her shoulder and tells her he's leaving the water situation in her capable hands. Before long, Sonia and Aqua are beaming with pride as they successfully grow a radiant, glowing flower. Later, Noel sits down for a drink with Gersus and asks him directly if he plans to participate in the upcoming coup. Clutching his head, Gersus sighs and admits that since the general is now leading the army, he has no choice but to join. Noel reflects on the situation, realizing the general has finally made his move, and there's no turning back. Gersus admits he was hesitant for Sonia's sake, but Schwarz convinced him she'd be safe under the protection of a former hero. Meanwhile, the Holy Queen rallies her followers at the church, securing their loyalty through the church's official patronage. Elsewhere, Prince Schwarz meets with hooded figures by the clock tower, frustrated by how little he knows about the mage's true intentions. Noel spots Ina eavesdropping in the doorway, and she promises to retrieve something vital for his mission. Noel asks if she's certain about this. Ina replies that while she isn't obligated to join the coup, she refuses to simply stand by and watch. Noel then bluntly confesses that he doesn't actually care if the revolution succeeds, catching Ina completely off guard. He looks her in the eye and tells her the village needs her, so she must promise to return safely. Flustered by his unexpected sincerity, the girl blushes and looks away before quietly agreeing to his request. Soon, Ina stands among the trees with her gear packed, waving goodbye to the group as the mountains loom in the distance. As she departs, Noel hoists a large basket onto his back and announces he's leaving too, leaving a confused Aqua to ask where he's going. He explains that Gersus ordered him to find the moly gleam flower to use as army provisions, as the plant is legendary for curing fatigue. Noel stands before Aqua with a wry smile, admitting that he unfortunately didn't have time to harvest the flowers while they were ripe. Nearby, Gersus sits with a mountain of vegetables and loot Sarah gathered. No matter how much they have, an army always needs more. Noel calculates their recent earnings, noting that they managed to pull in a total of 10,000 gold. Sarah quickly corrects him, explaining she spent the bulk of it on farming tools, while Sonia and Aqua bought spices and seeds. Noel tries to suggest they need someone to handle the accounting, but Aqua interrupts, excitedly asking if he just said something about cupcakes. Sonia admits princesses aren't taught math, and Sarah notes that demons don't use bookkeepers, while Aqua continues to beg for sweets. Suddenly, a voice interrupts the group, offering professional help with their budget management. A stranger stands before them, drawing everyone's gaze as Noel demands to know who they are. A young girl reaches out to them, introducing herself and claiming to be a prodigy when it comes to working with numbers. With a large bow in her hair, the girl introduces herself as Lily Tent and explains her brother sent her to help the village. Hearing her last name, Noel immediately realizes she's connected to Prince Schwarz. Lily confirms she is the prince's younger sister and admits her brother told her all about Noel's reputation. When Noel asks why she's here, Lily smiles, explaining that Schwarz wanted a talented and trusted bridge between their two parties. Lilia confidently places a hand on her chest, assuring them that since she's studied finance and taxation since childhood, they can leave the heavy lifting to her. Inside Noel's home, drawers are overflowing with coins, while stacks of disorganized bills litter the floor like paper mountains. Stunned by the mess, Lilia asks for an explanation, only for Noel to admit they've completely ignored their finances until now, leaving things in a chaotic state. Remaining unfazed, Lilia claims she can untangle this mess in just an hour, even asking for her next assignment once she finishes. Noel looks at her with skepticism, insisting such a feat is impossible and telling her there's no pressure to finish quickly. so she should just take her time. Later, Noel enters to find Lilia fast asleep at the table. Smiling at her hard work, he decides to brew her some refreshing Guillemec tea. He spots a polished ledger on the table and wonders if she actually finished, just as Lilia wakes up with a groggy, flushed face. Rubbing the sleep from her eyes, she spots Noel and reminds him that she promised to handle the work in record time. Placing her hand on the ledger, she proudly announces that every single receipt and expense has been meticulously sorted. She slams down 2 more stacks of books, explaining she's already cross-referenced local harvest prices with market averages and drafted a full analysis of their trade strategy. Pointing to a page, she notes that even with the current shortages in the kingdom of Schwarz, they could actually stand to increase their prices for a better profit. She beams, explaining the quality is so high that her brother suggests Noel should establish his own official brand, leaving Noel staring at her in utter disbelief. Clutching the book, she confidently asks Noel to hire her as his official accountant, guaranteeing that his income will skyrocket under her management. Noel stares at the massive stack of completed work, genuinely wondering if her accounting skills are actually some form of high-level magic. However, her expression turns serious as she admits there are still a few pressing concerns that need to be addressed. Outside the castle, the village continues to expand beneath the fluttering banners on the walls, though the whispers of revolution remain shrouded in mystery. A stern commander stands before a battalion of knights, his grim expression mirrored by the heavy banner hanging behind him as he prepares to speak. Meanwhile, the girls relax in the water, with the blonde stretching out her arms in pure bliss, while Sarah agrees that nothing beats the soothing comfort of a hot spring. They have Aqua and Noel to thank for the luxury, as the duo had recently unearthed the spring, with Noel wielding a pickaxe while Aqua cheered for their success. Aqua boastfully takes all the credit, suddenly leaping high into the air with her hair trailing behind her, leaving the other girls watching in stunned silence. Aqua splashes into the spring, creating a massive wave while praising the water's quality. Meanwhile, the third girl enters cautiously, towel-clad and only knee-deep, questioning how Aqua crafted such a stunning outdoor bath. Submerged and blissful, Aqua explains with her eyes closed that the spring isn't just for stamina recovery, it also leaves the skin feeling incredibly soft and smooth. Sarah ponders the spring's potential as a major tourist attraction, while Aqua relaxes on the bank, looking utterly satisfied with her handiwork. The blonde girl looks on with wide, anxious eyes, voicing her concerns about whether tourists would actually make the trip. With a confident smile, the short-haired girl reassures her, noting that she's already calculating the long-term prospects of the area. She then offers to scrub Aqua's back, prompting a delighted whistle from the goddess, who praises the girl for being so perceptive. As the newcomer begins the back scrub, the blonde girl fiddles with her hair before shifting the conversation toward the peculiar nature of the water. She swims over to Sarah, looking visibly troubled, which immediately catches Sarah's attention as she asks what's wrong. Standing face to face in the water, the blonde asks for Sarah's honest opinion regarding Lilia, leaving Sarah momentarily stunned by the direct question. After a moment of thought, Sarah admits that Lilia is incredibly talented, having been a massive help since taking over the group's finances. Looking down with a mix of anxiety and hesitation, the blonde reveals that she overheard a private conversation between Noel and Gersus while serving them tea. We flash back to her entering the room with a tray of drinks, catching the two men discussing the mysterious Prince Schwarz. Gersus leans in, questioning why the prince is staying so close to the king, suspecting he's trying to incite conflict in the neighboring kingdom, though Noel wonders if this is simply an order from the Holy Queen. Gersus agrees it's possible, but suggests the real reason might be that the prince knows Noel is the true hero, watching the young man's reaction closely. He explains that the power to defeat a demon king terrifies the nobility. Such a world-breaking force is impossible for the authorities to control, making Noel a threat to the global balance of power. Noel shrugs, arguing that since Prince Cain was the one publicly branded as the hero, the authorities should have been relieved to find out the real hero was actually on their side. Gersus slides a book across the table titled The Failed Prince, the hero who defeated the Demon King, featuring a heroic depiction of Cain on the cover. He explains that this state-mandated biography was manufactured to prop up Cain's reputation, forcing the citizens to buy into the lie as Noel flips through the pages. The propaganda was a desperate move, as everyone knew the real Cain was a frail, weak prince who could barely lift a sword, let alone lead an army. Despite the obvious lies, many citizens swallowed the propaganda, even criticizing the hero for not being more ruthless in his execution of the Demon King. Gersus noted that while the biography was factual, only the hero's name had been changed, leaving the other kingdoms dangerously unaware of the truth. Noel remained silent, his gaze fixed on the man as he finished his explanation. Sarah stood nearby, her head bowed as she processed the gravity of the situation. It was clear she understood exactly what was at stake. Suddenly, the blonde stood up from the water, demanding to know if Lilia's arrival at Prince Schwarz's request carried a hidden agenda. Sarah looked up, caught off guard by the sudden outburst. The girl stood her ground, declaring that she would follow whoever Noel chose to accept. Her voice was filled with unwavering confidence as she addressed the blonde. Crossing her arms, she expressed her concern about Noel and Lily's shopping trip, fearing something might go wrong. Sarah dismissed the worry, assuring her that Noel could handle anyone who crossed him. Blushing furiously, the girl insisted on joining them, unable to bear the thought of the two being alone together. She threw her arms out, her fists clenched in a mix of frustration and determination. Sarah reached out to the distracted blonde, asking if she was overthinking things, but the girl was already lost in her own schemes to close any potential loopholes. Sarah sighed, wondering if she was even being heard. Later in the city, Lilia was treating Sonia like a younger sister, and the blonde could only stammer in agreement. Lilia turned to the girl with a sweet smile, boasting that she had memorized the local market prices and would guide Sonia to the best bargains. Lilia skipped ahead, humming a cheerful tune, while Sonia followed behind, glancing around the towering buildings with visible anxiety. Their path was suddenly blocked by a mysterious figure, whose heavy boots were the only thing visible as he ordered them to halt. A group of thugs quickly surrounded the girls in the narrow alleyway. The leader stepped forward, demanding a passage fee if they wanted to continue, prompting a terrified Sonia to duck behind Lilia. Lilia remained calm, coolly asking for the price. When the massive bandit demanded a staggering 110 gold pieces, Sonia only shrank further behind her smaller companion. Without a hint of fear, Lilia called him out for his blatant greed, counter-offering 16 gold, a fair price even with the current inflation rates. The bandit grinned, refusing to budge on the price. He leaned in, suggesting she could pay with her body if she didn't have the coin. Lilia's cape slipped from her shoulder as she calmly asked if it would matter if they screamed. The man laughed, claiming they were in a secluded spot where no one would hear them. Lilia lowered her head, her bangs shadowing her eyes before letting out a soft, mocking gasp and asking if it was truly that isolated. In a sudden move, Lilia shoved Sonia to the front, telling the confused girl that she was counting on her to handle the situation. Now face to face with the towering thug, Sonia's courage failed her. She trembled, her fists clenched as she struggled to find her voice. Overcome with panic, the girl squeezed her eyes shut and let out a piercing, desperate scream for help. The bandit scoffed, laughing at their predicament and telling them to stop wasting his time. Little did he know, Noel was already standing right behind him. His subordinates were already scattered across the asphalt, unconscious, and the bandit's smirk instantly vanished into a mask of pure terror. One of the girls called out to the legendary warrior as he stood tall, his hair fluttering heroically in the breeze. A short while later, they arrived at a magnificent estate featuring a grand fountain surrounded by ornate railings. Lilia beamed with excitement, telling Noel she felt honored to witness his combat prowess firsthand, clasping her hands together in a gesture of pure admiration. She teased that she could already imagine her brother's reaction, a stern, bespectacled man, while Noel just gave a sheepish smile, downplaying his incredible skills. Lilia asked if a pack of thugs like that was really just child's play for a former hero, just as a bird fluttered past her. The bird landed gracefully on her outstretched hand, and she recognized it as her brother's messenger pigeon, quickly excusing herself to attend to its message. Elsewhere, Noel approached Sonia, handing her a refreshing drink as she stuttered out her gratitude. Gripping the glass with both hands, she looked down and asked how he knew they were in trouble, to which he replied that he'd been nearby and was worried about her safety. Sonia finally looked up at him, her voice trembling as she repeated the word worried, wondering why he was focusing so much on her. She tilted her head, noting that as far as she could tell, Noel-san seemed to be thinking quite a lot about Lilia as well. Sonia mumbled an apology, admitting she'd accidentally overheard his previous conversation with Gersus, while Noel listened intently to her confession in silence. He simply closed his eyes and smiled, explaining that Lilia was an ally now and a resident of their village, so there was no reason to doubt her. Sonia stared into her glass, remaining silent as she processed the hero's unwavering kindness. Finally, she asked how he could be so trusting. After being betrayed by the kingdom, how could he still welcome everyone, even a demon like Sarah? She confessed that she didn't understand how to become someone like him, capable of genuinely accepting others despite the past. Noel spoke her name softly and apologized, while Sonia admitted that since her engagement with Cain was annulled, her trust in others had been completely shattered. Leaning back against the bench, Noel explained that since they both knew the pain of betrayal, having the courage to trust again was the only way to build a strong future for their village. He told her he hoped she could learn to trust him and the others, leaving Sonia to wipe away her tears, touched by his faith, yet still wondering why he cared for her so deeply. Noel gasped as he realized the truth. With revolution spreading like wildfire, the king's army had naturally targeted General Gusher's family. Anticipating this, Lilia had strategically assigned Sarah to protect them, proving her tactical foresight was spot on. Sonia smiled awkwardly and closed her eyes. Though she tried to follow along, she actually had no clue what was happening. Noel grinned, noting that since they pulled it off without tipping her off, it meant he and Sarah had successfully completed their mission. Sonia's face flushed as she thanked him, her trust in him remaining completely unshakable. She sheepishly looked down at the glass in her hands, her face turning bright red while Noel watched her with a puzzled expression. Suddenly, Lilia came running toward them, waving her arms with her brother's messenger pigeon perched on her head as she apologized for the delay. As she reached them, Noel sensed her distress and asked what was wrong, noticing how she nervously clutched her chest. Fidgeting with a mix of excitement and anxiety, she delivered the grim news. The rebel army had been defeated, leaving Sonia and Noel stunned. On the battlefield, knights were being pushed back through the forest, desperately shouting for a retreat against an overwhelmingly powerful foe. Their opponent merely mocked their cries, dismissing the rebels as nothing more than pathetic, disorganized rabble. Cloak billowing behind his heavy armor, the long-haired commander raised his blade, promising to send every last one of them to hell. Back with the group, Lilia explained that despite the defeat, the uprising couldn't be considered a total disaster. With a determined look, she reassured Sonia that General Gusher was unharmed, allowing her to finally breathe a sigh of relief. As the group gathered around the table, Sarah cut through the relief with a serious question, demanding to know the reason for their defeat. Lilia admitted she had underestimated Knight Commander Goodal, a man who had effortlessly dismantled her brother's strategy and overwhelmed his men. While Noel had outshone him during the Demon King War, Goodal's inclusion in the hero's party proved his lethal, bloody efficiency was the real deal. Noel stroked his chin thoughtfully, the name Goodal echoing in his mind as he weighed the threat of his former peer. Lilia looked up at the hero standing before her, explaining that her brother had one final request for him. But Noel was one step ahead, cutting her off to ask if her brother wanted him to personally join the front lines of the war. Tilting her head, the girl explains that while they only need vegetables from the village, her brother specifically requested that Noel deliver them personally. A small wooden cart sat nearby, piled with carrots and cabbage. While Noel didn't mind the task, Lilia worriedly noted that the route was dangerously close to the battlefield. Noel gave her a reassuring smile, promising he could handle it. Lilia then began relaying her brother's specific instructions for the trip. She spread a map across the table and pointed to a specific detour, urging him to take the long way to avoid any danger. Meanwhile, the battlefield was a hive of activity. Inside the command tent, knights were busy preparing for war while General Goodal sat at a massive central table, deep in thought. Prince Cain and a young woman soon approached, praising the general for his stunning victory. When a surprised Goodal asked what brought them to the front, the prince claimed they were just paying a visit. Noticing the general's sour mood, the prince asked what was bothering him. Goodal scoffed, retorting that if the prince had time for social calls, he should be busy training the court magicians instead. He argued that if the magicians had actually done their jobs, the war would already be over. Frustrated, Goodal lowered his head and clenched his fist in silence. The prince just waved off the concern with a radiant smile, promising they would arrive in time for the next clash. Beside him, his companion clung to his arm with a doting expression. The general snapped, declaring he didn't care about church politics or delays. He demanded the prince show the true nobility expected of the royal family. Cain simply smiled, reaffirming his absolute faith in Goodal's ability to crush the rebels and unify the kingdom. Behind the prince, two knights hauled in a heavy wooden chest. Cain explained that the king was so impressed by Goodal's performance that he had sent a special reward. Inside the box lay a longsword resting on fine silk, but an ominous, dark haze seemed to swirl around the black blade. As Goodal reached for the hilt, the prince explained that the sword was a royal heirloom, a relic used in a legendary sacrifice to banish an evil god. The general inspected the weapon, asking if it was just a historical antique. Cain added that legend warns the evil god will return if the blade is ever drenched in blood. The girl beside the prince chirped that this was the general's chance to earn even more glory and become a true hero. Hearing this, Goodal's face twisted into a sinister grin. Satisfied, the general sheathed the blade and declared that whether it was an evil god or his enemies, they would all be stepping stones to his glory. With a shout, he ordered the march to begin. On the other side of the battlefield, General Gusher sat in grim silence. Beside him, Gersus held out his arm for a messenger bird to land. After reading the message, the general watched the bird fly off. Gersus noted that the enemy's court magicians had finally begun to make their move. They studied the map, noting the magicians on the right and Goodal's knights on the left. The enemy was closing in like a pincer, and if they didn't act, they would be completely annihilated. General Gouchard stared at the tactical map in tense silence, his eyes narrowing as a drop of sweat trickled down his cheek. Beside him, Gersus demanded to know Prince Schwarz's location, frustrated that the prince couldn't see the necessity of a retreat. A nearby knight dropped a bombshell. Prince Schwarz had gone out on a morning patrol and hadn't returned. Gersus and Gouchard whipped around in pure shock, screaming at the knight to repeat his report. Gouchard's mind began to spiral, fearing that Prince Schwarz and the kingdom of Schuyr were preparing to stab them in the back to seize a golden opportunity. Sometime later, a massive battalion of armored soldiers marched through a narrow gorge, their heavy banners fluttering in the wind. Suddenly, the lead soldier halted, causing General Goodal to ride up from the rear and demand to know why the march had stopped. A knight at the front apologized, informing the general that a lone carriage was directly blocking their path through the pass. Goodal roared at his men to clear the obstacle immediately, but the soldier hesitated, warning him that the man leading the cart was problematic. Goodal lashed out at his subordinates' incompetence, reminding him that they were a literal army, before shoving his way to the front to handle it himself. The general spurred his horse forward and yanked the reins tight, ready to berate whoever was foolish enough to stand in his way. There sat a man casually holding the reins of a horse-drawn cart. He looked up with a smirk, noting that it had been quite a long time since they last saw each other. Goodal's eyes nearly bulged out of his head as he stammered Noel's name in horror, screaming that it was impossible because the hero should be dead. Yet Noel just stared back, completely unfazed. Frozen in a state of pure shock, Goodal struggled to comprehend how Noel had survived, his mouth agape as he stared at the man he thought he'd disposed of. Unlike the panicked general, Noel calmly explained that while much had happened, he was now just a simple farmer making a delivery, his eyes fixed coolly on the road ahead. Goodal's mind raced with fear. Did Noel know about the plot to make Prince Cain the new hero? Did he know they were the ones who betrayed him? Noticing the cart was overflowing with vegetables, Goodal desperately offered to buy the entire stock for double the price, hoping Noel would just take the money and go home. Noel chuckled, pretending to consider the offer before stating that he had a prior agreement to fulfill, and he wasn't about to break a deal for a bit of extra coin. Goodal's face contorted in disbelief and rage, mentally cursing the hero for not knowing his place and defying a direct order. Forcing a jagged smile, the general offered to increase the price tenfold, pleading with Noel to take the gold and disappear so the army could continue its march. Noel admitted the offer was intriguing, but he wanted something far more valuable than money, prompting an overjoyed Goodal to promise him anything he desired. Noel confirmed he had something specific in mind, but warned the general that the price was steep, and there would be no turning back once he agreed to the trade. The man bit his lip and lowered his head, casting an anxious shadow over his face as he cursed his own arrogance. Noel flashed a chilling grin, suggesting with a tilt of his head that the general might appreciate such a souvenir. Drenched in cold sweat, Goodal stood frozen as Noel's words echoed in his mind. Was the hero actually allied with General Gouchara? Noel's expression shifted into something monstrous. his eyes turning cold and his mouth twisting into a predator's smile as he spoke of returning it. Panic seized Goodal as he interpreted return as a death sentence, convinced that Noel was finally moving in for the kill. Unable to decipher Noel's true intentions, Goodal braced himself for a fight to the death, while the two men shared a heavy, suffocating silence. He watched the hero like a hawk, terrified of a sudden strike, yet Noel remained unnervingly composed. A tense standoff ensued, with Noel staring down at his former comrade with a gaze completely devoid of emotion. Goodal wondered if the hero was preparing to draw the very sword gifted to him by the prince. Total hysteria set in. Goodal's face contorted in a silent scream of terror, realizing he stood absolutely no chance against the man before him. Snarling like a cornered animal, Goodal bared his teeth and spat out a final, desperate curse. Without warning, the general wheeled his horse around and bolted, leaving his confused subordinates shouting after him in the dust. He barked a frantic order for his men to hold the front line, but his only real priority was escaping before he became the next casualty. Goodal abandoned his honor and his knights, galloping through the gorge as fast as his horse could carry him. The abandoned knights drew their steel and surrounded the cart, yet Noel simply sat there, reins in hand, completely unbothered. Noel casually pondered the value of his broken sword, wondering if General Gushara would still want it as a gift. Despite the wall of blades pointed at his throat, the knights hesitated to strike, leaving Noel to wonder how he should deal with them. High above on the cliffside, 4 mysterious figures watched the chaos unfold: a relaxed mage, a girl with a staff, and 2 others lurking behind. The lead mage brushed back his hair with an irritated sigh, complaining about how exhausting war was compared to simple negotiation. Scowling at the mention of Goodal, the mage dismissed him as a mere upstart and signaled the court magicians to finally make their move. Lavushka mentioned she even had to postpone her experiments for this, and she was clearly miserable. Deep bags hung under her eyes from exhaustion, and her face twisted in annoyance at being pulled away from her work. The man with the long braid clutched a book to his chest, reminding them that they'd come too far to turn back now. Since this was a direct royal order, he suggested they simply show off the full extent of their power. The girl immediately shut down his attempt at motivation, stating she just wanted to go home as soon as possible. As she urged them to finish the job quickly, the second mage stood behind her in total silence. Finally, she spoke up, offering a radical solution. Why not just abandon the mission and retreat? Her expression remained dead serious, making it clear she wasn't joking about quitting. The 3 mages, who had been focused on the path ahead, all turned in unison to stare at the girl standing behind them. The magician with the long braid and bangs grimaced in disbelief before erupting into a scream. He demanded to know if she was stupid, reminding her once again that this was a royal decree. Squatting at the edge of the cliff, another mage grinned and mocked him for being such a fool. He joked that Ina could probably handle this alone anyway. After all, even an amateur like him could manage it. The girl with the staff looked at him with pure disgust, as if he were something she'd stepped in. With heavy disdain, she asked why she always had to endure Han's idiotic opinions. The man with the book and scythe intervened again, shouting that she was the one who suggested retreating. He barked that she'd only become arrogant because the hero prince handed her a position and told her to watch her tone. From the cliff's edge, the guy spread his arms, mockingly calling her a blatant backup, chosen only by the prince's whim. He even joked that the Demon King must be weak if someone like him could defeat him. The girl with the staff admitted she didn't meet the standards of a court mage, noting that someone had to be expelled just to make room for her. When her companion laughed at her for forgetting that man's name, she just looked away. They taunted her, claiming they were far more useful than she was, a fact she didn't even try to deny. Meanwhile, the second mage girl watched the bickering, remaining hauntingly silent. The long-haired mage began manifesting magic circles, a cruel smile on his face as he suggested incinerating the bums before the army arrived. However, the girl with the staff simply exhaled and refused. She realized how arrogant she'd been to think she could master any magic. As she reflected on her training and past battles, she began to genuinely doubt her own talent and abilities. But suddenly her eyes widened with a new sense of clarity, and she looked ahead with unwavering confidence. She knew the truth. She was the one chosen to defeat the Demon King, not him. A violent surge of lightning magic erupted from her palm, forming massive, overlapping magic circles in the air. The other mages watched in horror, shouting that such a massive magic circle should be impossible for someone like Ina. They stood frozen as the colossal seal blotted out the entire sky. Looking at the court mages without a hint of fear, Ina declared she would no longer allow people like them to stand in Noel's way as she unleashed her full power. Nearby, an empty command tent stood open to the elements, its fabric walls fluttering around abandoned crates and a lonely table. Suddenly, a man with glasses burst through the entrance, brandishing a staff and screaming for everyone to get moving. He barked out an urgent order to begin the offensive immediately. The armored man waiting for him was Gersus, who called out to Prince Schwarz in shock, demanding to know where he'd been. The bespectacled prince approached the table with an air of calm authority. Rapping his knuckles against the wood, Schwarz dismissed the question, insisting that his whereabouts didn't matter. He urged them to move quickly and seize this opportunity, leaving the men wondering exactly what chance he was referring to. Gersus warned the prince that an immediate offensive would leave them trapped between Goodal's knights and the court magicians. Despite the dire warning, the men remained surprisingly composed. Looking down with a smug smirk, Schwarz adjusted his glasses and dropped a bombshell. Goodal wouldn't be coming back to stop them. Stunned by the prince's declaration, Gersus looked at him with wide eyes, desperately seeking clarification on what he meant. Schwarz revealed that Noel had already dealt with the general. Meanwhile, the hero himself was casually traveling by cart, holding the reins with one hand while letting out a bored yawn. Behind Noel's cart lay the defeated remnants of General Goodal's elite knights. Every one of them had been cut down by Noel's strikes, their riderless horses galloping aimlessly into the distance. Schwarz threw his head back in triumph, clenching his fist. He had hoped Noel would delay the enemy, but he never expected such a total victory. He was visibly exhilarated to have witnessed such unimaginable power firsthand. He continued to praise the hero's god-tier swordsmanship, claiming Noel could carve through anyone standing in his way. To Schwarz, Noel's blade work wasn't just combat. It was a masterpiece. The other men could only listen in stunned silence. Standing with his back to the tent's exit, the prince insisted he wasn't exaggerating. Just as a massive explosion tore through the horizon, painting the sky in fire. General Gouchard and Gersus stared at the distant inferno in disbelief. Trembling, one of them stammered, demanding to know what could have caused such a devastating blast. An armored soldier burst into the tent, reporting that the explosion was the work of the court magicians. All three leaders turned, their faces grim as they processed the update. A thick, terrifying shroud of black smoke began to crawl across the sky, eclipsing the sun like an omen of death. Losing his composure, General Gouchard screamed at his men to advance on the royal chambers immediately. He barked that every second was more precious than their own lives. The knights mounted their steeds and charged toward the massive palace. Gouchard roared after them, commanding his forces to reduce the royal stronghold to rubble in a single decisive strike. Gouchard galloped at the front of the line, his soldiers flanking him as they surged forward like a tide of steel. Elsewhere, Noel finally stood up to survey the horizon. Nestled between the high hills and mountains, a small cluster of houses sat directly in his path. The long-haired hero smiled, pleasantly surprised to find a village in such a remote area. It was the perfect place to finally get some much-needed rest, but his relief was short-lived. A sudden violent noise made him freeze, his eyes widening in pure shock as a sense of dread washed over him. He whipped his head around just as a massive boar-like monster, far larger than any human, barreled past. Despite being riddled with dozens of arrows, the beast showed no signs of slowing down. The boar-like creature skids to a halt as it collapses, its massive frame curling up as it hits the dirt. General Goodal watches in stunned silence, his eyes wide as he tries to process the sight. Emerging from the dense forest, a young girl appears with a bow in hand. She reaches for her quiver, her focus entirely on her hunt, completely oblivious to the general standing before her. When Goodal calls out her name in disbelief, Sarah flinches, her intense concentration shattered by shock. Her eyes widen as she finally realizes she isn't alone. Shouting from atop his horse, the general demands to know how she could possibly be alive. Sarah can only stammer in response, her hand freezing mid-air as she stares back at him in terror. He screams at her, demanding to know who could have possibly removed her slave collar. Sarah remains silent and tense, a single bead of sweat rolling down her cheek as the pressure mounts. Realization hits Goodal like a bolt of lightning as he recalls his recent encounter with Noel on the wagon. The pieces of the puzzle finally fall into place, and his eyes light up with a sinister epiphany. His face contorts into a sneer as he realizes Noel and Gersus must be working together. The weight of his own deduction leaves him fuming, his brow furrowed as sweat pours down his face. If Sarah is here, then Noel must be hiding in this very village. Goodal breaks into a dark laugh, relishing the coincidence that he stumbled upon the one place so deeply connected to his enemy. Goodal's expression shifts into that of a total madman, his eyes turning cold and lifeless. He grins maliciously, declaring that by taking Sarah hostage, he can finally lure Noel to his certain death. He draws his blade with a sinister chuckle, already plotting to seize the village's resources and transform it into his own personal fortress. Sarah levels her bow at him, her voice trembling with rage as she screams that she'll never let him carry out such a horrific plan. Vowing to protect Noel and the village he loves, she brings the bow to her face to take aim, her expression hardening with newfound confidence. Leaping into the air, she releases the string, sending an arrow whistling toward her enemy. In the blink of an eye, a second blurring movement follows the projectile's path. A barrage of spectral arrows suddenly manifests from thin air, raining down on the general with lethal speed and precision. Still mounted on his horse, Goodal swings his sword in a powerful upward arc, deflecting the entire volley and triggering a massive explosive shockwave. Sarah watches in total confusion as her attack is neutralized with a single effortless swing. Her jaw drops in shock as she realizes the sheer gap in their power. Landing back on the ground, Sarah's eyes dart toward the massive boar she had just slain, which still lay motionless on its side. Sprinting toward the beast, she grabs it by its front hooves, pivoting with incredible strength to hurl the massive carcass into the air. Goodal remains motionless as the enormous beast hurtles toward him, spinning through the air with the full force of Sarah's desperate throw. With a dismissive smirk, the general effortlessly cleaves the flying obstacle in two with a single strike, looking completely relaxed and unshakable. The monster's blood sprayed from the impact, splattering right before his eyes. The man sneered at the girl, calling her attempt utterly futile. As the boar's blood cleared from his vision, the general finally noticed the volley of arrows screaming toward him. They were moving far too fast. He was out of time. 2 arrows buried themselves in his horse's flank, sending the beast into a panicked frenzy. Terrified, the general gripped the reins tight, shouting as the animal reared up on its hind legs. He leaped from the wounded steed, landing in a low crouch with his sword at the ready. Behind him, the horse's neck gushed crimson before it collapsed, eyes closing as it hit the dirt head first. Goodal looked up and let out a guttural groan, demanding to know if these underhanded tactics were the specialty of a demonic servant. Sarah reached for another arrow, her fingers brushing the fletching, but she suddenly froze in place, her body trembling as she stared ahead in shock. Sonia stepped out from the tree line, a basket of fresh flowers hanging from her arm. Oblivious to the carnage, she tilted her head and called out to Sarah, wondering why everyone was gathered there. Sarah could only shudder, her mouth agape and eyes wide with terror, unable to find the words to warn her friend. The general turned his head, and his face instantly twisted into a predatory, joyful grin at the sight of the newcomer. In a flash, he was behind the unsuspecting Sonia, pressing the cold steel of his blade against her delicate throat. Grinning like a madman, Goodal held Sonia tight by the shoulder, using her as a human shield. He barked an order at Sarah to drop her bow immediately, unless she wanted to watch the girl die. Sonia's face flushed as she stammered out a plea for Sarah to stay her hand. Though she tried to look brave, her trembling voice betrayed the sheer tension of the moment. Reluctantly, Sarah opened her hand, letting her bow clatter to the forest floor. Goodal stood triumphant in the clearing, surrounded by the shadows of the towering trees. The general let out a dark chuckle, remarking that it was a pity they'd all be dying anyway. He taunted them, saying they could reunite with Noel in hell, while Sarah glared back, speechless with rage. Held hostage and helpless, the girl lowered her head with a heavy sigh. She dreaded the thought of Noel returning to find them in such a pathetic state, while the general tightened his grip on his weapon. The man laughed off her despair, telling her not to get her hopes up. His arrogant expression made it clear. He believed the battle was already won. He boasted that Noel was currently occupied with his subordinates, recalling the moment his knights had swarmed the hero's carriage while he made his own strategic escape. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the shadows, claiming to have found what they were looking for. A figure emerged from the woods, draped in a heavy cloak that kept their face hidden in darkness. General Goodal whipped his head around, his confident smirk vanishing instantly. He demanded to know if this stranger was another one of Noel's allies, his voice laced with sudden anxiety. Ignoring the question, the cloaked man extended his hand. Magic circles began to manifest in the air before his palm, glowing with an ominous, surging power. Goodal abruptly yanks the blade from Sonia's neck and shoves her aside, sending the prisoner tumbling to the ground. With his sword drawn, the general charges toward the magician, who remains eerily still with a palm outstretched toward his attacker. A sickening thud echoes as Goodal impales the magician, hoisting her body into the air with a triumphant, mocking laugh. Blood spills from the magician's lips, but instead of crying out, she grins, telling Goodal he's just made a fatal mistake. Her hood slips, revealing a single blood-streaked eye and a body covered in the intricate symbols of a forbidden seal-breaking spell. She explains that his sword was the final key, acting as a catalyst for the magical markings etched across her chest. As the girl collapses to the earth, a panicked Goodal demands to know what kind of madness she has unleashed. Gasping for breath, she declares this is the spark that will change the world, as a serpentine black mist begins to coil around the blade. She laments her life of being cast aside by the army despite her devotion to magic, her face twisted into a haunting, final smile. To spite this unfair world, she releases a surge of darkness so thick it swallows the light, her laughter echoing through the void. Her sacrifice summons an ancient evil god, a skeletal nightmare of exposed ribs and rows of razor-sharp fangs. The massive demonic entity towers over the general, who collapses in a heap, stammering in sheer, pathetic disbelief. The beast tastes his fear, dragging its massive, wet tongue across Goodal's face as he shrieks in pure, unadulterated terror. Drenched in the monster's foul saliva, Goodal desperately screams that he is the one destined to rule this kingdom. His face contorts with primal horror as he realizes his royal ambitions are ending here, in the jaws of a nightmare. The monster's maw unhinges, and its slimy, muscular tongue lashes out to ensnare the general's body. In a single, sickening gulp, the creature snaps its jaws shut, and Goodal vanishes forever into its bottomless gullet. Sarah and Sonia can only watch from the dirt in paralyzed shock, wondering if they are witnessing the birth of an evil god. The black titan rears back on its hind legs, reaching its claws toward the heavens as dark tentacles erupt from its shadow. The sky bleeds into ink as the clouds vanish, replaced by a swirling vortex that strikes the earth with pillars of cursed light. In the distance, a young girl stood with her lamb, her long braided hair whipping in the wind as she gazed at a massive black crater blotting out the sky. Aqua stammered in disbelief, her face twisted in a mixture of awe and terror as the sheer scale of the disaster became clear. The city's skyscrapers were swallowed by the encroaching darkness, while the blackened heavens crackled with violent, searing lightning. Panic erupted in the streets as the crater continued to expand, with onlookers watching in horror as the sky itself seemed to rot before their eyes. Nearby, livestock collapsed where they stood, and a farmer could only watch in despair as his horse suddenly fell lifeless to the ground. Even the crops withered instantly in the farmer's hands, as a sinister black haze began to choke the life out of every living thing it touched. Meanwhile, inside a grand cathedral, the blackened sky was visible through the towering windows, casting a shadow over a spiked holy emblem. A young girl scratched her head nervously, a single bead of sweat rolling down her cheek as her grim premonition began to manifest. Surrounded by figures in dark robes, the girl in white declared that this disaster was on par with the Demon King. No, it was actually far worse. She urgently ordered her attendants to summon every high-ranking bishop immediately, and the men scrambled to fulfill her desperate command. She worried that even with every holy servant gathered, they could only hope to contain the threat, and there was no time to wait for foreign aid. Desperate, the girl cried out to the heavens, screaming that the evil god had finally been resurrected as the entity was bathed in a haunting light. She begged for a divine blessing, and in response, a swirling vortex of light began to coalesce around the ritual bayonet in the center of the hall. A haloed goddess descended from the air, but to the girl's shock, the deity claimed that her divine intervention wasn't even necessary. As her dress billowed in the divine aura, the goddess remained calm, leaving the young priestess speechless and utterly confused. With a serene smile, the goddess revealed that a helping hand had already been extended to deal with the enemy, leaving the girl stunned. Outside, the evil god's form shifted into something more human as it stood amidst the chaos, while Sarah and Sonia watched from below. Sarah realized the monster was growing larger by the second, suspecting that it was siphoning all the ambient energy from the surrounding area. Though she knew she should flee, Sarah found herself paralyzed by the overwhelming pressure of the disaster's epicenter. Beside her, Sonia squeezed her eyes shut and clenched her fists, praying for survival as the freezing winds battered against her. Sarah felt she had to protect Sonia, seeing her as the perfect partner for Noel. The elf pulled the girl close, shielding her head and bracing for the worst. Suddenly, a man appeared beside them, apologizing for the delay. Gasping in shock, Sarah began to rise, still clutching the trembling Sonia. It was Noel to the rescue. Gripping a massive blade, he stood with unwavering confidence, completely unfazed by the chaos unfolding before him. The elf could only stare in awe, her mouth agape as her eyes remained locked onto the hero. The monster let out a terrifying roar, revealing rows of razor-sharp, shark-like teeth. Its eyes flared like miniature suns as it shrieked toward the heavens. Striking with a flurry of invisible blows, the dark god lurched forward, its gaze finally dropping from the sky. An instant later, the monster's body detonated from within. Flesh and bone sprayed in every direction, leaving nothing behind but its severed legs and tail. With a single, decisive stroke, Noel had decimated the evil god. He landed gracefully on one knee, looking as relaxed as if he'd just finished a casual stroll. The oppressive black haze finally vanished, allowing the sky to clear as fluffy white clouds reclaimed the horizon. Nearby, a dazed Aqua stood among the sheep, clutching her head in total confusion. When the others asked if she was all right, she could barely process the question. Noticing the group, Aqua demanded to know what Noel and the others were doing there. Noel just gave a charming smile, while Sarah and Sonia stood behind him, mirroring his grin. Resting her chin on her hand, Aqua admitted she felt a strange sense of unease, but Noel cut her off with a broad, reassuring smile, telling her that the danger had passed and everyone was finally safe. Meanwhile, the royal capital was under siege. Thick plumes of smoke and dust billowed around the massive stone towers of the palace. Clad in heavy plate armor, a knight sprinted through the chaos toward the front lines. Gersus grit his teeth, his blade carving through a soldier's armor like paper. Before he could recover, a helmeted knight struck back, catching him in the shoulder. Turning to General Gushar, Gersus yelled for him to push forward while he held the line. With a final, meaningful glance, the general sprinted ahead. Bursting through the massive palace doors, Gushar led his armored knights into a brightly lit, opulent office. Two men waited inside. One immediately began screaming about the general's recklessness, demanding if he knew where he was. The second man sat silently, watching from his chair. Gushar stood his ground, retorting that if a worthy ruler sat upon the throne, there would be no need for rebellion. Unfortunately, that was far from the truth. Finally, he confronted the man on the throne, declaring it was the end and mockingly addressing him as "Your Majesty." The king gritted his teeth, his expression darkening as the reality of his downfall set in. Stepping onto the balcony, the general raised a triumphant fist to the masses below. He roared that the tyranny was finally over, and the crowd erupted, chanting for the glory of Livonia. With hands raised high, the citizens prayed for General Gushar's health and the prosperity of their nation. A massive sea of people gathered at the castle gates, their cheers echoing the joy of their hard-won victory. Meanwhile, Sarah and Noel made their way through the palace corridors. Instead of windows, massive open arches lined the walls, allowing the midday sun to bathe the halls in a golden glow. As they walked, Sarah inquired about the legal proceedings. Noel explained that with the royal family deposed, their heinous crimes were being broadcast to the world to justify the revolution to both the citizens and foreign allies. Glancing back at her, he added that a formal trial was necessary to seal their fate. Sarah looked at the hero, skeptical that a king would ever surrender his crown without a final, desperate struggle. Noel paused, stroking his chin in deep thought before admitting he couldn't be certain how the king would react. As they fell into step, Sarah shifted the conversation toward the saint's punishment. Noel gasped. the realization of Stella's fate suddenly hitting him. Deep within the palace, a pristine white corridor stretched out, decorated with elegant paintings and ending at a heavy, sealed door. Inside, Stella gripped the iron bars of her window, screaming in disbelief. She had expected a victory parade and a royal wedding with Prince Cain. How did her happily ever after turn into this nightmare? As she clung to the bars, the doors creaked open behind her. A voice cut through the air, asking if she was finally ready to hear the truth. Stella froze, the blood draining from her face. The Holy Queen stood there alongside Noel. Placing a hand on her hip, the Queen coldly informed her that the cheers she heard outside weren't for her, but were cries of relief at her downfall. Stella spun around, her eyes widening in terror at the sight of the Holy Queen and a very much alive Noel. She collapsed onto her bed, trembling as she stared at the man she thought was dead. Without a hint of emotion, the Queen looked down at her and announced that they were there to deliver her final sentence. Stella's voice failed her as she stammered, her face a mask of pure horror. She could only stare in paralyzed silence as her skin turned a ghostly pale. Desperate, she flailed her arms, demanding to know why she was being treated like a criminal. She insisted she was the one who slew the Demon King, rudely barking at Noel to testify to her heroism. The Queen countered, asking if it wasn't the hero who did all the work while she and the others simply stood in his way. Memories flashed back to the ritual, where Stella and her cohorts stood safely in a circle, while Noel faced the danger alone. Stella pathetically tried to shift the blame to Goodal, but the Queen just smirked. She then brought up the forgery of the hero's identity, asking if that sin was also just someone else's idea. Stella huddled on the bed, her hands trembling against her legs. She watched with mounting dread as the Holy Queen began to slowly approach her. Reaching out, the Queen placed her palm inches from Stella's forehead. She delivered the crushing verdict. From this moment on, calling herself a saint would be considered a grave, unforgivable sin. The Holy Queen pressed her fingers against the black mark on the girl's forehead, causing a radiant light to peel away from Stella's skin like a discarded seal. Clutching her head in disbelief, Stella gasped in denial, desperately claiming that the holy power belonged to her alone, even as her body trembled with a grimace of pure horror. The Holy Queen coldly dismissed her, explaining that the power was never hers to begin with. It was merely a gift borrowed from the goddess to aid the true hero. Overwhelmed by panic, Stella collapsed into a state of shock, only for the Queen to deliver the final blow. She would spend the rest of her days atoning for her sins within the capital's monastery. Forcing back her tremors, Stella lunged toward Noel, frantically shouting his name and claiming that now the whole world would finally recognize him as the kingdom's true savior. With tears streaming down her face, she pathetically pleaded for mercy, claiming she was pregnant and could never survive such a harsh life of isolation. She threw her head back in a fit of bitter sobbing, begging Noel to save her from the consequences of her own actions. Noel remained unmoved by her display, calmly stating that if she truly wanted to redeem herself, she was welcome to return to their hometown whenever she wished. He admitted the village was still a bit of a wreck and lacked any luxury, but suggested it was the perfect place for someone who actually wanted to start over. Stella's face flushed with rage as she shrieked in refusal, disgusted by the idea of living in a backwater village with nothing to its name. Covering her ears to block out the truth, she wailed that she'd rather die than live like a common peasant, proving she hadn't learned a single thing from her downfall. The Holy Queen ignored the outburst, reminding Stella that she would raise her child within the monastery walls while learning how to be a decent human being again. Visible annoyance flickered across the Queen's face as she reaffirmed that this wasn't a suggestion. It was her divine sentence. Stella slumped forward, completely broken, staring into the empty void as the reality of her situation finally began to sink in. In a moment of lingering attachment, she looked up and asked what would become of her co-conspirator, Prince Cain. The answer was grim. The prince was headed to the labor mines for the rest of his life, ensuring the two would never cross paths again. Broken and weeping, Stella could only echo the Queen's words, finally acknowledging the depth of their collective guilt. Later, as they walked through the sun-drenched corridors of the castle, Sarah reflected on the grim ending to Stella's ambitions. Sarah tried to look on the bright side, noting that the monastery would at least provide a safe and quiet environment for Stella to raise her child. Noel offered a faint, melancholy smile in agreement as Sarah placed a supportive hand on his back, guiding him forward toward their next chapter.